Morning, everybody. We're going to let some more people trickle in as we're getting through, but welcome. I'd like to thank all you for coming out to the SESC seminar this year. We got the agenda up on the board here. Got some good presentations in the morning, then we got a couple panel sessions after the break. So I'd also like to point out we're going to be using Slido, so if you have your phone, you're able to scan the QR code up here. We're going to use that for some in-between questions. So if you can get that pulled up, if you're having issues with that, feel free to find one of us and we can help you get that set up. The URL code's also on there. But I'll leave this up for a couple minutes just to let everybody get settled in with that, and then after we go through a little overview, we're going to get that all set to go. Thanks again. All right, as everyone's getting settled in, we're going to get started here. We'll be able to scan in the QR code coming up after the first batch of questions coming through. But right now, just going to give a little bit of an overview on what's going on in our district and some things that are going around in the community. So we have here our lovely team up on the board. I'm Tommy Pert. I'm the resource conservationist for the Kane, DuPage Soil and Water Conservation District. And we have our team all spread around today. So we got Isa and Emma are our resource analysts, Kat is our administrative coordinator, and Patrick is our resource specialist. So kind of just a little bit of background on SWCDs. I don't know how many, we've worked with a lot of you in the past, but if you're unfamiliar, just a little bit of background. So back in the 1930s, Dust Bowl events saw some of the largest erosion that we saw in the U.S., covering vast areas of the country in dust. So this led to a push in legislation putting conservation of soil and water resources at the national policy priority. So much of this land was being privately owned. President Roosevelt at the time wrote to state governors to recommend local landowners form soil and water conservation districts for their specific locations. 1937, Soil and Water Conservation District Act was adopted. This is defined SWCDs as locally organized and operated units of government functioning under state law for the improvement of wise use of soil, water, and related resources within the district. So in 1944, Kane County had formed their district, and shortly thereafter, DuPage had merged with that, forming our combined district. So currently, there are 97 districts covering the 102 counties within Illinois. So what do SWCDs do? In short, it's just anything related to conservation of water and soil resources within our districts. So we do a lot of education outreach programs, anything from education programs for clean water and healthy soils to well water testing, running native tree and plant sales, offering fish and conservation book sales as well. We're involved in watershed planning efforts throughout the district, so helping to write and administer grants for updating local watershed plans. We also offer technical assistance, so getting conservation practices onto agricultural lands. Our Partners for Conservation program allows us to get conservation practices in the hands of landowners, and cost share funding for implementing practices like pollinator habitat, critical area planting, cover crops, no-till, as well as some special projects like stream bank stabilization and well decommissioning projects. We're also involved in urban development, where sustainable development is extremely important for what we're doing, partnering with regulatory agencies like the Army Corps of Engineers, Illinois EPA, and municipalities to help with compliance and urban development for stormwater aspects. So our soil erosion sediment control allows us to be boots on the ground personnel to make sure that development is taking into account the natural resources and reducing that potential pollution to any of the surrounding water bodies. So briefly touching on our memorandums of understanding, through MOUs in our SSC program specifically, it allows cooperation between local and municipal governments and helping ensure responsible and sustainable development. We can be involved in the process as early as reviewing engineering plans for SESC and SWIP plans, through involvement on pre-construction sites and meetings on site, performing inspections during the duration of active construction, reporting back any findings or maintenance items that may be needed to MS4 or municipal contacts, as well as issuing closeouts prior to submitting notice of termination for any NPDES permitting to the IEPA. We also play a role in Northeastern Illinois Envirothon, which is coming up in March. It's an environmental science competition for high school students. This year, both of the days are going to be taking place at Morton Arboretum, right in Lisle. We are currently seeking sponsors for that too, so if you or your company or anybody is interested in becoming a sponsor for that, please be sure to reach out. Board of Directors election is coming up on February 11th. So our SWCD board is made up of 5 elected directors that serve 2-year terms on the board. If you live or own land within Kane or DuPage County and you're over the age of 18, you're entitled to vote in that. So we have 2 locations this year for 2 positions that are up for election in our St. Charles office as well as at the DuPage County Farm Bureau out in Carroll Stream. Another event that's coming up in February, North Cook and Kane DuPage Soil and Water Conservation Districts are partnering with the Illinois Arborists Association, talking about soils and urban forestry. So that is coming up on February 20th, and that's a free program. So if anybody is interested in that or knows municipal arborists or anybody that you work with would be interested in getting that, there are 2 CEUs for that. Feel free to head over to our training events website on the IUM website. They'll have additional events that are coming up in the next couple months. So feel free to screenshot that, and the QR code will take you to some more training events on the Illinois Urban Manual. Speaking of Illinois Urban Manual, we've got some new updates that are be coming out. We're looking to implement a new e-newsletter. So you can subscribe already up on our IUM website. And then we're also looking to potentially find sponsors for that since we are in a grant period and sometimes the funding can be a little bit spotty at times. Looking to be able to offer that material to the people that need it and maintain that newsletter. Just kind of help with some of the administrative costs. So if you're interested in sponsoring that, feel free to reach out to the contact email, which is both here and on the Illinois Urban Manual website. And then once again, just thank you all for coming. Here's our contact email for our district. We pride ourselves in being able to answer the phone and be a resource for the community, whether it's technical or just anything that's going on within our district. Check out our website, follow us on social media if you feel so inclined, and follow our newsletter. And then thank you again for coming to this. So this is our Slido app if you had missed before. If you're able to scan the QR code, we're gonna do a couple of interactive questions that'll be going on throughout the day. And we're gonna kind of get started with a little bit of baseline questioning, just to kind of see where everybody is. You can see the polling that's going on online up on the screen. And yeah, we're gonna get Isa up here to kind of run through this Slido stuff.
All right, good morning, everyone. My name is Isabella Borzica, and I am the Senior Resource Analyst with the Kane DuPage Soil and Water Conservation District. I'm going to be leading you all through the Slido questions this morning. We will have some to start off with, as well as some more in-between speakers, and before and after the break, as well as the end of the seminar to get some feedback from you. So starting off, I see that many people have started answering already, is what type of organization do you work for? So I'll give you a couple minutes to work through that. It looks like we have a lot of engineering people here. Thank you for joining us, as well as municipality and ecological and some county folks as well, construction. All right, a couple more seconds here and we'll move on. Okay, now what county or counties do you work in? left DuPage. I see Wisconsin up here. Uzbekistan. I give you a couple more seconds here. Indiana. All right, so I'm seeing a nice mix of Midwest here, mostly Illinois, but we have some Indiana, Iowa, as well as Wisconsin. Now, how familiar are you with the soil and water conservation districts? It doesn't have to be ours. It can be some of our surrounding districts, McHenry Lake, Kendall County, North Cook, Will South Cook. Okay. All right, nice to see that most of you are familiar with us or very familiar. If you're somewhat familiar or not at all familiar, hopefully you'll get more information about what we do and how we can help from this seminar today. Okay, so that is all we have right now, and I will pass it back to Tommy here.
Thank you, Isa. All right, so now we're going to dive into some of the more technical talks. So the presentation today is going to kind of focus a little bit on our Causeway standard. We have a draft review that's in our Illinois Urban Manual. So we're going to do a little overview of the IUM, some of the updates, and some of the things that we're working on at the moment. Going over the Causeway practice standard draft, some additional in-stream and associated practices, and then any final thoughts. So if you're unfamiliar, the Illinois Urban Manual is a technical resource for those involved in planning, soil erosion sediment control, construction. It's mainly for overall ecosystem protection as well as enhancement. Sets a minimum standard for best management practices in Illinois, for the soil erosion sediment control, for stormwater management, for special area protection, and green infrastructure. IUM has several sections that throughout a life of a project, from the initial planning all the way to final stabilization and post-maintenance, that can be very useful. So there's an initiative to update and keep the IUM as it's a continuous and a cooperative effort between many different agencies. So our technical review committee and our steering committee are actively tasked with the revision of the IUM. Currently, we're in a grant cycle working on updating the website, making it more user-friendly, making sure all the links are working, as well as updating the practice standards, looking through some of the standard details. So we thought we'd use this opportunity to kind of review our draft Causeway practice standard, kind of get some feedback on it from the people that may be utilizing it in their day-to-day work. So looking at Causeways, the way that it's set up at the moment is our draft standard would be 956 for temporary rock riprap causeway. So what is it? It's a temporary roadway or a path to cross a portion or a body of water or waterway that's intended to provide access for vehicles or construction equipment, accessing construction site, performing maintenance work. So essentially, it's the major reason for a causeway is to minimize the water quality impacts, minimize environmental impacts, and provide safe access for any equipment in a work area that's within a water body. So using a causeway, some conditions you want to keep in mind. It may not always be the best option. They should only be used where a culvert, bridge, or other stream crossing may not be the best option for work, but is still needed within the waterway. It should only be used in areas where there's not endangered or threatened species that are going to be impacted. Stream, overbank, or lake bed should be able to support the causeway, so looking into hydric soils or other soils that may not be able to potentially hold that would be important. Also looking for underlying utilities, making sure that you have approval prior to that to make sure. Also, if you're looking to completely cross a waterway, that may not necessarily be the proper practice, so looking at the temporary stream crossing standard may be a better option in that situation. So some of the criteria for causeway use, remembering that permits very well may be required for any construction of a causeway. Design is going to be extremely important, so they should be designed to withstand any high flows, any ice, overtopping, other factors, and equipment loads that would be working on the causeway. So design should be intended not to cause any erosion or any damage to the stream banks, not to cause any increase in water flow or depth from the increases in any water surface profiles. So where it's feasible, location of the causeway should be selected where erosion potential is going to be lowest. You want to do that evaluating the channel geometry, the slopes, and the stability. Width of the causeway should be looked at, sized appropriately for adequate width, both to access for stability, as well as addressing any potential aquatic impacts to the environment. Causeways in general should be in place for the shortest practical period of time when it's needed, not constructed during high water conditions if it's practical, and should be removed as soon as its purpose has been completed. Some other things that need to be taken into account in your material specifications, making sure that you're utilizing clean riprap. Any fines or soils should be not present in any of the causeway materials. And looking at fish and wildlife passage, fish passage needs to be evaluated. That could require potential assessment for fish species present in the stream, and the timing should avoid any potential spawning runs as well as impacts to mussel beds that may be within the waterway. So there are two main types of causeways that are listed within the IUM's practice standard drafts. We have vented and unvented causeways. Vented causeway is just essentially, it has openings or like culverts within the causeway embankment that allows low flow conditions to move through. High flows are going to be generally intended to overtop the causeway. So the pipe should be able to withstand any of the equipment loads and the vehicles that may be driving over the top. Requirements may need to be meeting regulatory authority, regulatory agencies like the IDNR, IEPA, Army Corps of Engineers, and the U.S. Coast Guard. So make sure that you're following those as you're going through the design for any vented causeways. For unvented causeways, it's just ones that typically are going to not have any flows passing through the actual causeway embankment. It may be necessary for fish passage, so when looking at invented ones, you just want to make sure that fish passage and wildlife passage is going to be able to go through when deciding what type of causeway to use. These are typically used more in lakes, pools, level pools, or anywhere where a causeway is not going to enter stream flow path or a floodway. So some other considerations, planning is extremely important. You want to make sure that when it's needed, they're going to be timed, that they take place during low flow conditions. Potential for embankment failure really needs to be taken account for and addressed. Some potential factors to look into for that would be how long the causeway is going to be in place, any probability that the water level is going to be higher than the causeway surface, what the magnitude of impacts for the design elevation, design water elevation, if those are going to be exceeding, the safety of the workers, as well as what may happen to the potential environment if the embankment does overflow and if you do have failure with that. Looking at equipment and supply staging areas, you want to make sure that you're limiting any potential ground disturbance, implementing any of the soil erosion and sediment control measures that may be needed for that. Any installation removal of causeways should be done in a manner to minimize that disturbance to the stream or the lake bed in the adjacent areas. So looking at specific times of disturbance when they may be greatest, so especially installation, removal, or heavy use after storm periods may need to be explored, and the use of additional practices in conjunction with this will need to be explored to make sure that you're remaining compliant and reducing any sediment pollution potential. So for some plans and specifications, looking at the causeway, it's going to be different for every single project. So some basic minimums that you want to have are the location of the causeway. If there's any required material specifications, to include those in the plans. Causeway geometry and dimensions, any necessary engineering design that may be needed, SESC scour reduction plans, as well as a removal and restoration plan. It's important to make sure that those are included in the beginning process so they can be adjusted and worked on throughout the progress of the project. So looking up here, the IUM doesn't currently have a standard detail that's in there at the moment. So this is from the Iowa Department of Transportation, looking at specific causeway equipment plans, as well as plans for stream crossings and how they may differ, showing what potential factors you may need to be looking for, what may require pipe and pipe distance if you're having vented areas, as well as slope embankment for the sides of the causeway. So another plan looking at here, so this is looking at 4 causeway work pads within the Fox River, and there are bridge connections that allow equipment to get to each area up against the existing piers where the work is going to be occurring. So you can see that this is proposed dewatering plan, so where the bags may be throughout the course of the project, as well as any potential backup areas, depending on what may be going on during the duration of the project. So you can see on the bottom here, you have the width of the causeway is going to be shown, as well as geotextile and the riprap materials that are going to be used, as well as the normal water levels and the slope embankment angles along the sides of the causeway. And then this specific plan is kind of looking at a cross-section of a causeway up against the project area. I show this one specifically because the plans for removal of the riprap is essentially, normally you'd be removing all the material unless you have prior approval or permits to be able to utilize some of the riprap areas for, in this case, there was a scour hole potentially behind the project, but it wasn't quite known exactly how much material may be needed for that. So that's why it's extremely important to be following the standards to make sure that you have clean materials that are going in, and you're following to make sure that the stream bed is going to be returned to its original and intended elevation. So once the causeway is set and installed, operation and maintenance is important to be looking at and addressing. Inspections should be occurring after any runoff producing precipitation events. During those inspections, you want to be checking for blockages, so that's including any vent pipes that may be below the water. You want to be looking at any erosion of the causeway on the sides and the ends, any potential channel scour that's going on at the base of the causeway. If there's any riprap displacement or piping, you want to make sure that those repairs are going to be made and addressed immediately, because preventing any further damage to the structure as well as any potential damage to the environment around. Removal of the causeway should be made immediately whenever it's no longer needed, unless there is design permit conditions allow for that, as well as after removal, you want to make sure that restoration of the channel or the lake beds going back to its original cross-section. And it should be pointed out in the removal and the restoration plan during the design phase, and also updated throughout the course of the project. So some additional in-stream work standards that you may see. These are all the active ones that are up on the Illinois Urban Manual website. They may be utilized in conjunction or working and occurring simultaneously during any potential in-stream work or any causeway work that may be going on, in order to reduce any pollution or sedimentation potential and stay in compliance. So if you're at last year's seminar, we kind of went in depth on in-stream plans and dewatering plans specifically. That is up on YouTube too, so if you want to take a deep dive on some of those, you can feel free to go back to the website and check that out. But essentially looking for different resources and standards to remain compliant and responsible, and development is absolutely necessary moving forward. So moving to the next couple presentations, we're going to focus a little bit more on the permitting side and specific permits and what may be needed and what specific type of work you may be able to do under those. So properly planning, implementing, maintaining, and removing practices are going to help protect workers, help protect the surrounding environment and the resources that we have. So if anybody here is interested in the development, the review of any practice standards, of anything that's going on in the Illinois Urban Manual, feel free to reach out to us. We do have a couple of copies of the draft version of the Causeway practice standard right now. So if you want a copy of that, just find me after. If not, you can send an email to us and we'll be able to reach out if you're interested in looking at that and reviewing the language. Other than that, are there any questions before we get moving on to the next portion of the presentation? All right, if not, then we'll move on, and I think we got Patrick Verhalen from the Army Corps of Engineers is going to be talking on some things that will be going on in his neck of the woods.
While we're waiting for Patrick Verhalen to get set up, I will walk you guys through the next question about the Illinois Urban Manual. So how familiar is everyone in this room with the IUM? Have you used it regularly? Have you seen it or have heard about it in your work? Okay. It's nice to see we have most people who are either familiar or very familiar. As Tommy said earlier, please feel free to go on the IUM website and sign up for our newsletter so you can get regular information about it.
Okay, yeah. So we are having a little bit of technical difficulties. So DuPage stormwater, if you're ready, we can swap around those, and we'll try and get Patrick set up afterwards. If not, just let me know, and then we can get that all set up for that. All right. Not sure if these are going to.
Hello, everyone. I'm Matt with DuPage County Stormwater. So, stormwater management in DuPage County started in 1989. We offer 6 different programs. Today, we're going to be talking specifically about regulatory services. So, here's a general overview of the different areas we're going to talk about. So, why talk about construction entrances? It's the most commonly complained about sediment erosion control issue, mostly because that's the most visible to the public. It also can cause soil to run into different storm drains and cause sedimentation that way, but mostly it just ends up being a public nuisance and safety issue. So here's general specs that from the urban manual. For DuPage County in particular, the things that we see wrong most is the construction entrances tend to be capped before they're supposed to be. The point of a construction entrance is to essentially vibrate the tires to kick off the sediment. So when you cap it early, what tends to happen is the soil will stick to your tires and not be able to flow off. Another issue we see is we regulate unincorporated predominantly. So what you end up seeing is ditches throughout the county. What happens when you put a construction entrance down, if you do not allow water to flow underneath it, it ends up damming the water, causing issues that way, either the water flow over the top and or flood your neighbors. Another common issue is we see the construction entrances aren't long enough. So here you can see they're supposed to be 70 feet on a large construction project. If you're working just a single family or takedown lot, it's supposed to be 30 feet. When you don't put fabric underneath, again, when the tires will immediately sink in, essentially rendering your construction entrance moot. Here's an example of a good construction entrance. So concrete washout, why do we care? So concrete washout has a very high pH, which can cause issues in fish. Not only that, it has very heavy metals, arsenic, lead. So we tend to care quite a bit about this. And yes, rainwater counts. So concrete washout itself is the mixture of the concrete slurry with water. So when it mixes with rainwater, essentially, all you're doing is just creating more washout. So here's an example I saw fairly recently. When we're talking about individual takedown lots, it tends to be an issue of spacing. So we tend to see a lot of plastic liners with 2x4s, and just for easy access, people will tend to put it, as you can see, towards the front of their lot. The issues with this is the capacity is not high enough when you have multiple construction trucks driving in. The other issue is, again, how close it is to the curb. This will then, in this picture, this ended up flowing right into an inlet. So what are we looking for? So ideally, your washout will be at least 50 feet from an inlet. This isn't always feasible in all locations. So when you are drawing your plan, since it seems like a lot of engineers are here, you need to be mindful of where the water will flow from. So when you're putting it on a small takedown lot, maybe put it closer to the foundation of the house, keep it away, more away from the curbs and the ditches. And then when you have a facility for your maintenance crews, let them be aware that once it gets near 2/3 full, it needs to be changed out and be ready for the next container. This way we can avoid some of the issues of washout running into the streets and into the curbs and inlets. Here's an example of a good one. Now this is a prefabricated concrete washout container. Obviously, again, for smaller lots, we know it's not always feasible. But when you do have a smaller lot and you can construct it with hay bales, with a plastic liner, again, just be mindful of placement and location.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jason English with Stormwater Management in DuPage County. So I'm going to talk about perimeter controls. Obviously, we were talking about siting and kind of how we would permit and inspect a site when we're out on a site. And so along with the concrete washouts and rock construction entrances, we're going to be looking at perimeter controls. So there are three main types of perimeter controls that we deal with at DuPage County. Silt fence is one. You can see here that this one is installed well, except it's upside down with the line there. Filter socks are another one that we see often, and then a third one that we see often are straw wattles. Silt fences have some benefits and some drawbacks, like all BMPs. One of the benefits is it's used, so a lot of people know what it is and where to get it, so it's widely available. It does provide a physical barrier to off-site sedimentation. A drawback is that it is more difficult to install properly. Its trenching is best done with specialized equipment. You can see this one on the screen. They didn't trench it, so no protection. So it's prone to user error, installed backwards, it's punctured by equipment, run over by equipment, you name it, blown away by the wind, knocked over by snow, just about anything can happen. So it does not flow through as well as other controls, and so there can be a pooling effect where you get water build up behind it, and so it doesn't become quite as effective. Filter socks are another one that we see. One of the benefits of filter sock is that it is easier to install. You can see here that it's put down probably by hand. It does maintain its function even when it's damaged, as long as it's not damaged all the way through. They are filled with various materials, compost, rice hulls, switchgrass, other materials, and they do have a nice flow-through rate, about twice as fast as silt fence. One of the drawbacks is that it can be improperly installed. It's not staked if it's on a steeper slope. It's not hooked up the slope to prevent anything from running around it. It's not properly junctioned, or in this case, as you can see, they put their spoil pile outside the silt sock, so it didn't really help. Straw wattles are another one. They're functionally in between silt fence and filter socks. They're also easy to install. They provide some sediment filtering capability. They have a high flow-through rate. They maintain their function when damaged, and they can be biodegradable, and eventually we will decompose into the soil if you get the right kind. One of the drawbacks is that if they're just the same as a silt sock, if they're improperly installed, they're not going to work properly, just I suppose like any BMP. So. Another thing that we see on plans and sites are check dams. They're used as energy dissipators and sediment control on ditch lines. DuPage County does require them to be used at all construction sites in ditch lines. So as they're considered concentrated flows in these ditch lines, we do not allow sheet flow BMPs such as silt fence. We don't allow hay bales in any circumstances as a BMP. We do require straw wattles or filter socks. Be careful that the socks cover the entire profile of the ditch. You can see here these don't cover the entire profile of the ditch. Otherwise, water can run around the sock and can cause excessive erosion. So other than the fact that they're not quite long enough, that's a pretty good example. Back to Matt.
So inlet protection. Something that gets commonly overlooked is that inlet protection should always be combined with another form of protection. You'll see in a picture coming up here with that one, the middle picture. So even with an inlet basket, which I didn't believe this one had, all of the sediment would quickly overrun the inlet basket. So when you do, you want to combine different forms of protection. You could have a silt sock around it. You could have worse erosion control blanket installed around it with a high flow silt fence as an example. Again, you need to be aware of the size of the inlet. So using the wrong size protection will render it ineffective. And then something we see still to this day, fabric and hay bales being over an inlet does not count as protection. So on that right picture, you can see someone went through Joann Fabric, got some nice hay bales, probably for $8, still had the plastic around it. So that we still see this to this day. So then just make sure you're installing an improved inlet protection. The other issue with that is the French drain. The water would still go around it regardless. And then just make sure when you're submitting your plans, you show the specs and the multiple forms of protection.
One area that we deal with a lot are special management areas, and so special management areas are wetlands, buffers, or floodplains. When we're talking about erosion control in special management areas, we do require a double row of perimeter control, including high visibility fencing. And so one of the concerns that we have in these areas would be trenching if you're dealing with sensitive areas, sensitive plants, even trees, that when you're trenching, you can trench through the roots or damage the vegetation. So BMP selection is very important. One way you can mitigate that is by selecting BMPs that are not silt fence, so that they don't require trenching. We do require the high visibility fencing, or at least high visibility control, in order to prevent people from driving into the areas. Obviously, we mentioned that silt fences and other things get damaged by people driving over them. It's very common that people drive over their controls and can potentially drive into the special management areas or stockpile things in special management areas where they're not supposed to. So that high visibility fencing does give you some protection against that, at least sort of idiot-proofs it.
So drain tiles, this is something that people generally don't think about in plans and can come up kind of later in the project. So just a brief history of it. For drain tiles in Illinois in particular, in the 1935, farmers had laid enough drain tiles to cover the world 6 times. It's quite a bit, and in DuPage County, Kane County, places where predominantly were farmland that are being urbanized, you still, to this day, tend to run into drain tiles on construction sites. These tend to be found during the excavation process of your single-family homes or whatever building you're trying to build. If these aren't properly addressed, obviously they can cause soil erosion around your foundation, water accumulation, cracks in your foundation, on the lesser side mold, but you'd be more worried about the foundation integrity. So for DuPage County in particular, once we discover a drain tile, further inspections and all work have to be halted prior to its resolution. Any modifications should comply with Illinois drainage code. Essentially, just it should flow how it was prior. A drain study must be submitted, completed, and approved, and then provide specifications of what you're planning on doing with said drain tile. And again, preserve the existing characteristics of the drain tile. So here's an example of a drain tile I found in a excavated home. You tend to see the terracotta clay around the side of an excavation, as pictured on the left. Other signs that you run into a drain tile could be the terracotta clay and spoil piles as well.
So the last 2 things to discuss will be maintenance of perimeter BMPs and stabilization. Obviously, we need to maintain all of our controls. Talked about that in the very first topic. Equipment damage is the most common reason for the need to replace BMPs. Lack of function due to being overwhelmed with sediment or damaged by other natural things like rainwater and ice and snow is another reason. So we should inspect our BMPs as often as necessary, weekly or after every rainfall event, to prevent failure in off-site discharge or sedimentation. This site you can see here was actually awaiting the final stabilization. So they took their controls down, and then we had a big rain and had a nice off-site discharge. So even on a small site, it can have a bigger impact. On larger sites, the impact can be much larger and more disastrous. So to stabilize, it's our first line of defense, essentially against erosion and sedimentation. We do, at DuPage County, require stabilization to be completed prior to the closure of any permit where earth disturbance occurs. And so you can see a couple of different types of stabilization. We consider acceptable stabilization to be one of three methods: seed and blanket, hydroseed, or sod. Seed and blanket are biodegradable. They're biodegradable blankets per our code that we require to be biodegradable in special management areas. So you can see this example on the left in this gully here that we've got seed and blanket placed down along with some vegetative. I believe those are plugs there. So anyway, photodegradable blankets are not acceptable. The netting does not degrade evenly. This leads to a lot of issues with maintenance, but also trapping little critters. So biodegradable blankets are pretty easy to find, and so we do require those to be used in any special management areas, of course, which are wetlands, buffers, floodplains. Hydroseed is also an effective method to establish vegetation. You can do it more rapidly in a larger area. Of course, it does cost a little bit more. And then sod gives you an immediate result. It does require watering, and of course it does cost a little bit more than the other methods, but it is an option. So, any questions? Yes, sir.
Does DuPage County require drain tile investigation before plan approval or before?
If you know about it, yes, but if you discover it, then this is under the assumption that you didn't know about the drain tile. If you did know about the drain tile, you would want to let us know, like have the investigation ahead of time to prevent inspections and work being halted. Yes. It's not required. If you do know about it, though, it will save you a lot of time and hassle.
I know Kane County does, they require drain tile investigation before, the approval of development.
No.
So once you find it,
Yeah.
basically, once you find it, you got to show where it is.
Right, that's why you
Right.
do it ahead of time.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
Not during construction.
Any other questions?
Oh, and then last, to consider stabilization, is just seed and blanket, or is that what you guys?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, of course, the goal of getting it to grow, but for closing our permit, like in terms of a grading permit. Yeah, yes. Now, in special management areas, there could be some requirements for the vegetation to follow up and make sure that it's grown over time, but on just a standard lot, not necessarily. So, but
For you guys, it's got to be
seed and blanket, hydroseed, sod. So to close out the grading part of the permit. So.
And if it's a larger project, then you'd be under the ILR 10, so that you'd still have to have everything final stabilized. This is for projects that aren't falling under that jurisdiction.
Anything else? All right, thank you.
Try this again. Should be all good here.
All right, we'll go through another question for the IOM here while we're waiting. Now, how often do you use the IOM in your work? Okay. So it looks like most of you use it occasionally, and about a quarter of you use it rarely. Okay. Good for us to know. And what other technical resources do you utilize regularly other than the IUM? If you don't use it at all or you use it rarely in particular? Okay, we'll have IDOT on here. Okay. All right. Nice seeing a lot of diversity here. We got county ordinances, local ordinances, standards, NRCS, IDOT, and apparently Andy in the brain. So nice to see the diversity here.
Thank you. Thanks, Issa. And I'll hand this off. We'll hand this off to Patrick Verhalen here now and let that kind of run through.
Morning, everyone. I'm Patrick Verhalen, Regulatory Project Manager from the Army Corps of Engineers Chicago District. For those of you that don't know me, I've been there about 2.5 years. Before that, I worked for 2 different consultants in the Kane County DOT. Today, wanted to go through kind of a quick overview of some of our permits, highlight a couple of things that we're trying to push out to everybody or highlight for incoming permit submittals. Talk about some in-stream work requirements. I know last year I presented as well and went through our conditions. I'm not going to go through as much in detail, but I do want to talk about a few things that we are looking at more strenuously moving forward, and then highlight a couple of things as recommendations for where to go to get some inspiration and design requirements, excuse me, for working in water. We have 3 main permits that we issue under Section 404 of the Clean Water Act and Section 10 of the Rivers and Harbor Act. Individual or standard permits, which are for larger impacts. It's a lot more in-depth review. We have regional general permits, which are mild permit review. They're not quite an individual, but they're not quite a quick, yes, you can do this nationwide permit. I think we have 3 or 4 that the Chicago District uses that are valid in the state of Illinois. One of them is for transportation projects where you have impacts between a ½ acre and an acre. Shoreline activities for piers, docks, boat houses on the chain of lakes and other larger water bodies that we regulate, and then Lake Michigan projects for stone revetments, protection. What else do we do? I don't think we do any piers along there. Some of our nationwide permit, or all of our nationwide permits, the nationwide permit program expires March 14th of 2026, next year. Every 5 years, they're re-reviewed. Some of them are modified, some of them are updated, some of them are revoked. most of them continue to move forward. We haven't seen anything yet from headquarters indicating which way they're moving with the nationwide permit program. We're expecting most of them to continue on, kind of waiting to see what this new administration is going to do to our permit program first. So your guess is as good as mine at this point. Any projects moving forward or that are currently have a nationwide permit issued for them, you have 12 months from this date, so basically March of 2027, to complete that activity. Not the project itself, but the activity that's being permitted. If the permits are renewed, or the permit program is renewed and your permit itself doesn't change, then you still have until March 14th of 2027 to get your project completed. Now, if you think it might take you more than that, then you can submit to us for re-verification. It's basically you're reapplying for that same permit, you're asking for an extension. It's the same type of review. Some nationwide permits do not require a PCN, a pre-construction notice, basically an application to us saying what the work is to be done. If you're replacing a culvert in kind, a 12-inch metal culvert, you're not changing the dimensions, you're not impacting additional wetlands. That is a very minimal environmental impact in our view, in our program, and you don't have to submit to us to do that work. You're automatically covered. But our recommendation is before you start any work, you look at what the requirements are for that permit. You can call us for a pre-application meeting, go through it. We cannot verbally or we can't in writing say, yes, this qualifies for a non-notifying permit, but we can talk through what the options are. If you do not need a permit directly for us, if it's automatically covered, you can then, we recommend, writing a memo to your file, keeping it on site saying this project automatically qualifies for this nationwide permit, therefore it's covered, we have our permit. Whether we issue a permit or not, soil erosion and sediment controls are required. There's 32 general conditions for the nationwide permit program. Number 12 is erosion controls must be applied. The appropriate ones have to be installed and maintained throughout the entire impact. If you have a small project and it's non-reporting or non-notifying, we cannot add special conditions like in-stream work, specifying that you have to notify us if there's work to be done or if things change. But that doesn't alleviate you from making sure you're meeting those requirements. What type of permit should I request? How should I submit? So right now, if you have any impact to any aquatic resource, we are suggesting you request a permit from us. If you don't want to have to mitigate, or you're not sure if you need to permit all the impacts or not, then when you submit your permit application, ask for a request for a jurisdictional termination, an AJD. As of now, our directive from headquarters is that jurisdictional determinations are not required for a permit. If you submit a permit and you don't request a JD, then we assume that all the aquatic resources that are being impacted or in the site are under federal jurisdiction. Now that doesn't tie it in perpetuity, but items that are not a priority for us will sit on the back burner. And I apologize, I know I have a couple of AJDs that aren't tied to a permit that are at least 2 years old. We will get to them when we have the ability to do so. I apologize for all of us. I know that's what no one wants to hear. But the other important part about this is consultants should not be assuming jurisdiction or assuming wetlands are not jurisdictional. That's gotten some people into trouble because you're making an assumption and the actual defendable determination can only be made by the Army Corps of Engineers. If you have a project that has no impacts whatsoever, that's when you should come to us for a no permit required letter. No permit required letters are treated the same as a jurisdictional determination, only just a little bit higher on the priority schedule. If you're in a hurry or you have shorter timelines, first of all, you should have planned ahead, but permits actually do have a timeline. Once it's determined complete, nationwide permits should be completed within 60 days. That's assuming we have everything in the first place. Individual permits are supposed to be 120 days, but those permits have a lot more in-depth review and take a lot longer in general, more than just 120 days. We are trying to work with the counties in our district for accepting a memo to file or some other letter that says a project is already covered automatically under nationwide permit. If not, then you're more than welcome to submit for a permit. This is one of the things that we've done for a long time with jurisdictional terminations is done those ahead of time so that you can tell whether or not you have to go through the county or which part of the tree in the county ordinances you actually have to follow. We are trying to work with the various counties to accept some sort of documentation saying something is a non-notifying permit. At this time, we don't. I'm the POC for ComEd projects, and I think in 2023, I did 63 permits, and those were all for less than 400 square feet of impact because they were either in Lake, McHenry, or DuPage County and required a permit. Most of our permits that are not under another agency like IDOT or the tollway will likely require SWCD oversight, so reviewing the plans ahead of time, approving the erosion control plans, and then periodic inspections after the project has started. To issue a permit, we will not require the letter from the SWCD that says, yes, we approve these plans. We just need to know that you have submitted it and have a receipt saying, yes, the SWCD has started their review. The other thing that we're trying to push forward to is the regulatory request system, RRS. The link is up here. This is an automated system where you can enter your information, your application, upload your supporting documents. This helps us reduce our permitting time because you end up putting in some of that initial information. Project purpose. Where are the resources? You can upload GIS files directly and it will populate in our system then your wetland boundaries. This is one of the biggest, I don't want to say time sucks, but one of the things that takes the longest for us is if you have a site with several wetlands on it, finding the boundaries, entering the quality, entering their locations, it slows us down. This allows you to upload a KMZ file and everything then populates in our website, in the database that we process through. This also allows you to track our interaction with those documents and make sure that we're reviewing those in a timely manner. If you're still not sure, the Chicago Request email is still up and running. You're more than welcome to submit your package that way. All right, so last year I went over our several general conditions for in-stream work. Basically, we don't allow work in high flow conditions. We wanted either no flow or low flow. Your work site must pass the 2-year peak flow. If you have everything set up appropriately, we have a big storm, and all of that gets washed out, we will not hold that against you. We won't say you're in non-compliance because you were compliant. You were doing what you could to keep those waters out of your site. If you need to isolate from flowing water, cofferdams must be made of a non-erodible material constructed from the upland and then set into the water. No equipment in flowing water. There have been a couple requests that I've had where we've worked with the applicant. They've had an individual 401 water quality certification. where we are allowing a skid steer to drive from their access point through the water to get to their site to remove some pure debris. But those also have to follow the individual or the general water quality, where the hydraulic machinery has biodegradable hydraulic fluid, and that those machines are washed before and after entering the water. There's also conditions regarding bypass pumping. So if you are completely closing off a stream and you're pumping around it, that discharge needs to be on a stabilized surface but does not have to go through a filter bag. I think I talked last year about one of the in-stream work plans I had. They were trying to use 2 8-inch pumps and pump them through a filter bag that's not equipped to handle 3,500 gallons per minute. If you're dewatering a site, that discharge must be filtered. And not just in a filter bag. If you're mucking around and dewatering at the same time, a filter bag is not enough to remove suspended clays before discharging. Stabilize slopes prior to accepting flow. So if your work requires a permit from us, we include these permits. We're also going to attach a copy of the General 401 Water Quality Certification from IEPA, which has several conditions as well, and those must be followed. Those are incorporated as part of our permit. And those include, like I mentioned, the biodegradable hydraulic fluid, dewatering and bypass conditions, which are similar to ours. And the other major point is any of your backfill in the water has to be clean stone, not chipped up concrete, but it has to be clean stone. Other items we look include causeway plans and details that include your type of stone, locations, dimensions, basically the things that Tommy had mentioned earlier in proper planning for in-stream work and causeways. We'll also include the statement that prior to commencement of work, you'll submit those construction plans and narratives of the contractor's preferred method. So this is if you don't have a dewatering plan in your actual construction documents, and you're pawning it off on the contractor. The items we expect to see are a complete narrative of the work. What items are you using? What materials? What specifications? What your expected flows are? When you put those materials in the water, are you causing flooding upstream? Are you backing up the water? Monitoring requirements. So once you install your system, how are you going to keep a check to make sure it's working? We want to know that because we have several contractors where they've put their pumps down, they pump it through a bag, and then they just walk away. They don't care. And then we come out there and the bag's full of sediment. It's just about to blow, and then they've got bigger issues. So we want to know what that contractor is doing to actually monitor it. Then shop drawings or a sketch. And those documents have to marry up to one another. We want to know that what you're saying you're going to do and what you're showing us you're going to do are the same thing. I'm also the IDOT POC. I've permitted several projects with IDOT, and I have a feeling I'm going to have a lot more coming up. And one of the things I'm trying to work with them is to put in-stream work plans in the actual construction drawings. This is not means and methods. This is another erosion control measure, or BMP, that should be included in the plans. Contractors can make modifications. They can propose different things. And those contractors, if they do change the plan or want to change it, they'll be required to make specifics, and then they have to come back through us through approval. This can prevent cost overruns, time and materials costs. Some of the issues we've run into is lack of right-of-way. The right-of-way is just enough to build the project, but not enough to put in these controls. So by thinking these things ahead of time, you're planning out what you need, what space you need. If you need to put a whole treatment train because you've got high clay soils, you need to put a sediment tank, a bag, maybe flocculants, then you have the room ahead of time if you get the appropriate easements. General statement, sediment leaving the site is bad. It could be a violation, we could have enforcement actions, depending on how the contract's written, there could be erosion control deficiencies. We want to make sure that the applicant and the contractor are doing everything in their power to appropriately protect downstream resources. Bypass pumping, as I mentioned before, does not require treatment if done correctly. It does require a stable outfall. Some stormwater pollution prevention plans have indicated that flocculants aren't necessary. Well, how do you know that if you haven't tested the soil and you haven't gone through your planning ahead of time? The other main caveat we have with these is you need routine maintenance. Make sure that they are monitoring and maintaining those erosion controls. Filter bags fill up fast, especially if you're working in the water. They may need to be replaced daily. There's many resources available. As Tommy was highlighting, the draft cofferdam review, or draft causeway practice standard. There's several other in the urban manual. We highly recommend those. That's one of the minimum standards that we also refer back to periodically. As we saw in the survey before I started, a lot of you are using county and state DOT standards and design manuals and other successful projects. I was looking back at a couple of different things in preparing this, and I went back to the Long Meadow Parkway causeway plans, and those were detailed. The specifications in the engineering documents had 4 pages outlining the requirements for dewatering. Those are the things we like to see ahead of time because that makes our job easier and can turn permits around faster. And thank you for your time and attention, and if you have any questions, I would be happy to answer them to the best of my ability. Jamie.
You mentioned planning ahead when you apply for stuff, and we know there's a backlog, and completely respect and appreciate that. Do you have a recommendation of how long you should apply in advance for? I mean, during 2 years, when you get like grant funds and things like that, 2 years might not even be possible. So what tips can you give us to help us prep for that?
So, not waiting till 2 months before construction is best. It depends on how involved the project is. I mean, we're doing our best to try and get them out as quickly as possible. If the application is incomplete, it's going to take longer because then there's more of a back and forth. For more simple projects, I recommend 6 months. A lot of the permitting I've been doing with IDOT is in phase 1, so you're still 1.5 years, 2 years out to construction, possibly. So that's, I mean, those usually are still a quicker turnaround, but I mean, yeah, at least 6 months. I mean, if you have a hard and fast deadline, even if you just contact us and say, hey, we have this coming, can we talk through it? Submit the permit application. That was the other thing I forgot to mention. For pre-application meetings, submit a permit application, a joint permit application, even if it's not complete. Submit it to us, say, hey, we want to talk about this project. We'll get the permit number started. We get a permit logged in our system to start, and then we can move forward with meeting with you and talking about it and try and talk out a timeline. I mean, if there's something that's an emergency, then yeah, we'll do what we can. But I would say at least 6 months for a simple project, at least a year for something more complex. Yep. Anybody else? Suits.
We have JD wetland, right? Their impact less than 1/10 of an acre.
Yep.
Do they need to apply for a permit?
Any impacts, yes. Whether it's less than, well, they need to review to see if it's covered automatically under a nationwide, if it's reporting or not. If they're unsure, submit an application. We'll process it, even if it is non-reporting, we'll still process it as a permit. If it's under 1/10 of an acre, it likely doesn't require mitigation. That's the biggest threshold, is whether it requires mitigation or not. Anybody else?
Last time I used the regulatory request system for an FDR, it wasn't really set up very well for no wetland impacts. Do you have any recommendations for how to use that better?
We're learning it in the same rate you guys are, so I don't off the top of my head. I haven't tried processing one through there, so I don't have an answer, but if you see me at break, I will jot your information down and talk with the one person in our office that has more experience in developing it and see what they say, and then I can get back to you.
Yeah, the one time I used it, I had to work with the project manager and put in essentially like non-answers or false information in there and just talk them through what it was so it could actually be submitted.
Gotcha. Cool. Anybody else? Yes.
Can you explain that pre-construction notice again? You don't decide if it's required, who decides that?
It's kind of at your own risk. So if you have a project, you're not sure, submit a permit anyway. It's better to submit and get a permit from us than not be sure. I mean, we can discuss it and we can outline what the requirements, where the specific project would trigger a pre-construction notice, which is basically just the full application documents. But it's generally things that are not impacting a wetland, not creating any more impact than what's already there, like a culvert replacement. I'm trying to think of what else. Anything that's over, above, or under a navigable waterway, under Section 10 requires a notification. Generally things that are maintenance and very, very minor impacts. So like replacing a single power pole in a wetland should be non-notifying because it's, 16 square feet of impact. Anybody else?
So I have a question.
Yep.
So since we're talking about PCNs and if we make that judgment at our risk, but you're saying to go ahead and submit a permit application if there is a slight question, is it gonna still take 6 months for us to get an answer? Or is it?
If it's a complete application, it should be done in less than 60 days for a nationwide permit. If it's something, if you submit at least just the joint application and say, hey, I have this project, I want to talk about it, and then you decide after we've discussed it that it is a non-notifying, then you can withdraw the permit from us and go on your merry way.
One more.
Sure.
Since you referenced emergencies, what are your expectations for a notification on emergencies? Like washouts and things like that for railroads or transportation projects?
So if it's something that is a critical safety issue, I would recommend doing what you need to make it safe and contacting, if you have a specific POC, I don't think there is one for railroads specifically, submit an email to Chicago Request saying, hey, we have a washout, it's going to destroy this track, or it's a safety concern. We will, my experience, the one I've done, I've said, go ahead and do it, and we will work on an after-the-fact permit, because that safety is more critical than the resource. So I'm not saying go ahead and impact, but at least let us know. The one I did, we ended up doing an after-the-fact permit. It wasn't an enforcement action or anything bad. It was just, this needs to be done right away because we don't want to lose millions of dollars or a train or crash people or something.
You're all my witnesses.
Anyone else?
Is there a buffer requirement? I mean, we're staying out of the wetland. It's a core wetland. We're not impacting it. Is there like a buffer requirement?
Once the regional permit program that we used to have went away, the nationwide permit program does not have buffer requirements. So no. At the federal level, we do not require buffers. Do not impact it, yeah. Do not put fill in it, yeah. All right, I will be around through the whole presentation, or through the whole seminar thing today, so if you have any questions you don't want to ask up in front of anyone, that's fine. You can come find me. All right, thank you very much.
All right, so we got Mark Hoskins coming up next from the Illinois DNR, and you should be all set and ready to go here.
Is there a mouse to advance?
Yes.
Oh, right there, okay. I see it. Oh, well, look at that. Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. Okay, thanks. Thanks, Tommy and Patrick, for inviting us, the OWR, to give a quick talk on our program, which really we relate more to water quantity, and you people are all quality people, so we do respect that, but our approach is more on flooding and maintaining flood levels to an acceptable level so that more drainage, so more flood damages don't occur. Today I'm going to talk quickly about rules and regulations for our permits. Quickly introduce the map revision manual. My job right now is to review flood studies, updates to flood studies, and that's my main goal, but I also help out in the permitting program. Dams, the dam safety program, public waters, which would be like large rivers, and then the Lake Michigan water allocation. I see now that the QR code would be a better way to do this, and I apologize, I'm not quite up to date, but at the bottom is the web link. I refer to that kind of throughout the presentation. If you scroll down to the bottom part of our first opening screen, you'll see pretty much what I'm going to talk about today. We'll talk about, then kind of zooming in on that. Let's see, yeah. So looking at the right side, we're going to, the majority of the talk today is going to be on our regulatory program. We're going to talk about statewide permits, which is really work for minor construction in floodplains. Then Lake Michigan water quickly. We'll go through what a joint application permit is, which also we share with the Army Corps of Engineers, the same form for certain types of permits. Some common questions, fee payment, and then there's other resources to help you move forward on the program. So today, to be more specific, our administrative rules would include the Part 3700, 3708, then I'll broad brush dam safety and navigable waters, which would be public waters, and then a really broad brush on the Lake Michigan water allocation. Okay, what's a floodway? We think of floodways in two ways. One that is what's called a designated floodway, which we'll show a slide on how that's actually done, and then something which is a non-designated floodway. So non-designated just means there's no floodway defined within the floodplain itself. And generally, we only require permits for urban watersheds, the amount of water that is approaching your project through the channel, of 1 square mile for urban and 10 square miles for rural. As you can see here, I don't know how to point here. Maybe the cursor. Can you see the cursor? No. Yeah, there it is, okay. So this hatched area would be a designated floodway, and that would be predefined on the map itself. You'll see that in the oncoming slides. And we call that an engineered zone or an AE zone. And Zone A is still a waterway, but it doesn't have, it wasn't put through a detailed study. It was more of an approximate study. So sometimes there's no base flood elevations associated with an A zone. In fact, A means approximate. So oftentimes there are none there. Okay, so let's run through this. Hope this, here we go. Okay, so we're having whoa, what happened? What did I do? Okay, sorry. So we're having a 100-year storm here, and boom, water goes up in the waterway. And that we would call the base flood elevation. Now, okay, how you define a 100-year storm is up for some debate, and certainly with climate change, that's a moving target. But in general, in the Chicagoland area, somewhere around 7.5 to 8 inches of water in one day would be about a 100-year storm event. So that's what's happened. So when we try to define a floodway, we have what's called surcharge, and then within Illinois, we have 90% of the storage area of the total cross-section. So let's just look at that. So let's just assume it's 0.1 feet. So what happens? Well, people start to develop because land near a waterway is very valuable. So this particular person just developed a little bit. Then it rains again. Okay, the water just goes up a little bit because there was only a small amount of encroachment. Now more encroachment occurs, maybe on both sides. Whoops, I have to do that on both sides. Okay, and that's what, now you're up to the allowable level. Now remember, a floodway is defined ahead of time. This isn't just defined as people are filling in the side of the channel. A floodway is a defined exercise to locate this floodway area, or the area where the majority of the water has to be maintained so that upstream property owners won't be adversely impacted. On either side of the floodway, we call it the fringe. Okay. And that is just in a cross-sectional perspective how we define a floodway and why we define the floodway, because we're going to take a look at this amount of water that's surcharged as a result of construction. So we want to allow that. So what does our permitting do? We think of it in two terms. Non-designated floodway has different rules because why? Because the floodway is not well designed. We don't really know what will happen. It hasn't been mapped that way. So then we have the other set of rules which says, hey, we do know, we have that definition, so we're going to allow for certain activities to happen as a result of us having a better knowledge of what goes on in that waterway when it actually is filled. So looking over to the left side, the non-designated, we want to maintain conveyance. So whoever is working in that waterway has to show that with a computer calculation. You may, for bridges, we allow for 1/10 of water surface increase, except if there's significant upstream damages. So your particular site might be like, you can't increase the water level at all. Well, that's because there are upstream flood damages, so we don't want to negatively impact that. So that's a part of the submittal, so you have to account for that. In Part 3708 rules, we now can take a look at velocity changes. We can look at storage. And really, in Illinois, storage for us is a major criteria. So when you are developing in the floodway, remember I'm talking about developing the floodway, the fringe doesn't matter. We've already defined the fringe as allowable fill. So great, that's fine. You can work in the fringe, but as soon as you start working in the floodway, we force compensatory storage at certain levels of storm intensity, 0, 10, and 10 to 100. And so, again, we're trying to minimize upstream damages, and that's all you need to know right now. Okay, so now we'll take a little more in-depth dive into the 3700 and 3708 rules, which are the main rules that apply for most applications. In 3700, remember, that's non-designated, or there's no floodway that's defined. And we are not jurisdictional. So in other words, if your watershed upstream is 0.5 square miles, we're like, fine, you can do whatever you want. That's not a part of our rules. We don't regulate that. That's non-jurisdictional. Now you have to determine if you're a rural area. There's very few rural areas in the Chicagoland area. It's just developing so quickly. But sit down with us and talk to us if you can present future plans that show that indeed there's not going to be significant development in the next 5 years. Yeah, you're right. It would be a rural development. In general, also, 3700 rules apply to the whole state. 3708 rules only are only within these 6 counties around Chicago. It's just the way the 3708 rules are written. Okay, there's 2 types of permits for 3700. One is a formal permit, and one would be a statewide permit. Statewide permits are generally for minor projects that involve all these topics. These are the active statewide permits that are available right now. The majority most of them that are used, I've highlighted in a darker font. So boat docks is a real big one, and those are some quick regulations that spin around the statewide 5. And you can download, and again, I apologize, this should be a QR code so you can take a picture of it, but that is the link for downloading any one of these statewide applications, permits. They describe, they're not that large. Maybe the actual document is about 4 pages, kind of describing the issues for that particular application. Then 3708 rules. So now we're jumping into this 6-county area around Chicago. Same criteria of 1 square mile urban area would necessitate, that is like the gate, that's the number one thing that we take a look at, that you have to be draining more than a square mile. Now, the only minor construction permit that's allowable within a Part 3708 is what's called an RP3, Regional Permit Number 3, and I'll hit that on the next slide. All the other formal permits would be classified as a formal permit, would include bridges and culverts, channel modifications, and public flood control projects. This is the minor construction within a Part 3708 called an RP3. Only these 4 categories apply. Underground utilities, sanitary sewer outfalls, sidewalks, patio, athletic fields, and stream protection activities. Okay, what's unique to the Part 3700 rules is this concept called an appropriate use. So you can't just do anything within the floodway, but we restrict that to certain types of projects, including the flood control, you see them at the bottom here, outfalls, garages, storage sheds, bridges, culverts, parking lots that don't have more than 1 foot deep of 100-year flood elevations on them. So that's the list that we have. The only other Part 3708 that's just different is any work within the floodway, we require a map revision because you're working in the floodway. You're changing this concept of that's what's supposed to protect everybody. There's also delegation. So in other words, if you submit a project that requires a permit within 3708, we may delegate it to DuPage County, or we might delegate it to Lake County. So there's a list of delegated communities that would take over that review. We would no longer do that. And same with IDOT. We have a memorandum of understanding with them. It dates back. There's fees, yeah, so those are the fees that we have now. Basically for 3700, for if you require calculations. If you don't require calculations for your application, then it's $1,300. Yeah, $1,300. We never go over 5,000. And delegation fee is $270. And how you apply, how you can submit that is on this, again, this web link. There's a way where you can submit electronic. We're not as sophisticated to use Zelly or anything like that, but there's other ways you can do that. Joint application form, this is the form, I'll go through that in a minute, that would accompany your application. The joint application form is needed, again, for all formal permits and for delegated communities. And my boss, Bill Boyd, you can submit electronic submittal for that. We totally accept like 11 by 17 PDFs. That's fine. You don't have to, mail in a larger sheet. Sometimes you may want to if you want to have clarity on certain projects. And please, always call us ahead of time if you have got a large project, or even if you have, no matter whatever the size of the project is, we're always available for consultation ahead of time. And that really helps us in our review of your project because you're introducing it to us. Okay, when not to submit a formal permit. Generally, if it's less than 1 square mile, which you ran through that pretty quickly, if you are already qualified for a statewide permit, exempt activities include maintenance. So you're just painting a bridge or something like that. You're not really changing the structure of the bridge. That's maintenance. So just let us know about it and we're good. And also we can also, we work with IDOT on, again, how roadways are always an impact to floodplains. And so the two of us work together on that. Okay, I'm just going to go blow by blow the different portions of the application form. So the applicant number and the date, we put that on there after we receive it. The applicant's name and contact information, obviously email would be very helpful because that's what we're going to do is we can submit and email back and forth to keep everybody informed of the status. The agent is the engineer who'd be working on the project. Then statement of authorization, that just allows the engineer to sign the form. So the applicant would sign the top and the engineer would sign it out. Then adjacent property owners, section, township, and range, municipality, where you're working in what city or what county. A brief description of the project is very helpful. This is just kind of gives a quick overview of what you're trying to do. And purpose of the project, that's related. Drainage, okay, that's for dredging is 11. Starting and stopping the project, Signature and date's kind of important. Have the applicant sign it, or again, on the page 1, there is the allowance for the engineer to sign, but sign and date it. That's kind of important. Okay, supporting information. This is helpful for us. Give us good narrative. Generally submit a report. This is for formal permits, really. Location map. If you take your map and your property and your project and put it on top of a firm, and you can get with the NFHL, National Flood Hazard Layer, which we'll talk about that in a second, it's a wonderful site that gives you this level of detail where you can zoom in to the point where you can see cars and people. You know, you can really get into the nitty-gritty of where your project is. Draw your project over top of that so we can see how it impacts on the floodplain. Grading plan, show us existing and proposed grades. Provide cross sections, especially for road projects, because you want to see that level of detail. Have your PE sign. Submit a digital copy of your HEC 1, I'm sorry, your HEC RAS and your HMS model, because we want to run it and check sensitivities, and it just, we would need to have that information. So we only need one copy. Overlooked and overreported. Overlooked and overreported. Within your narrative, give us the major roadways, the panel number. We'd like to know if it's a phased construction. That's helpful. Explain about the issue of upstream damages, because that can come into play. H&H, you're going to need to get the FEMA model. That's called the effective model, and then we can take a look at it, and how you're going to increase the accuracy of that model is also important. Again, we'll talk about that in a second. Your storage calculations. Remember, we talked about 0 to 10 and 10 to 100, as that's important for us to understand that you're maintaining how that waterway will react, because you're recreating the storage that you potentially have taken out. We don't need wetlands information. Again, that's just, how do I say, we worry about the quantity of the water, not the wetlands. The Army Corps handles a lot of the wetlands issues very well, and we work in tandem with them. Cross-section plots, you don't need to plot out all your cross-sections. Some people submit and they have like 30 pages or 50 pages of just cross-sections. That's not needed. We can do that through the digital model. And give us your summary table for your hydrology and hydraulics. Okay, now I'm going to take a look at multiple administrative rules and how they work with each other. If you're working in public water, we can't delegate that. So we have to handle that full review. So we won't delegate projects that are within the Fox or within the Des Plaines floodway. So that's important to know. Whenever there's public water construction, it needs a 21-day public notice. We'll issue the public notice. We'll request for adjacent property owners, and we'll actually email or we'll mail out to them, USPS mail. And we have to satisfy both the 3704, which is public water, and 3708, which is what we talked about, the floodway. Okay, now you're going to take submit number 2. This is another scenario. You have a part 3700 floodplain, and you want to define a floodway. As soon as you do that, we're going to have a map revision, because you're changing the map. You're adding a floodway as a part of your submittal for whatever reason, and that's great. But so we would need to have that. We would probably require Bolton 75 if you were doing a basin-wide study. Otherwise, we will accept the FEMA flows generally. 2D models is a whole new discussion. Those are models that are being developed now that FEMA may or may not incorporate in the future. Okay, project map revision is required. Okay, we're gonna require it if you're working in the floodway, as mentioned earlier, changing a 3700 to a 3708, and also if you're increasing the BFE, base flood elevation, or the 100-year flood elevation by more than 1/10 of a foot. So that's 1.2 inches. Model impacts, if you're going to have any upstream impacts, we need to see that. That would probably push towards a map revision. And if you're increasing flows by more than, increasing or decreasing flows by more than 10%, we would require a map revision. By the way, FEMA requires a map revision whether you're increasing or decreasing the flood elevations by 1/10 of a foot. And it's not required, obviously, for the same reasons. If you're less than 1/10 of a foot, then we not require, or less than that. Okay, now I'm going to kind of give you a quick introduction to the map revision manual, and that's this. And way back in '96, I actually wrote the first map revision manual that we published. So I apologize. Now you know, I've been around for a while. And what's hilarious about it, there's not one reference to the web in all that document. Why? It didn't exist. FEMA starts in 1998. So it's just amazing the amount of improvement that we've had just in everything we do in everyday lives is cool. I never even heard of a Slido. When I came here, I thought, oh, that's kind of a cool idea. So I have a lot to learn, too, about some of the newer features that are available to us on the web and how to move forward. But this new map revision manual is much more helpful. Basically, it's going to start off by giving you, this is sort of an index of the whole thing. And it's going to give you a lot of background on FEMA and the map revision process. And if you have any other questions about that, you can actually take the CFM program gives you a lot of background about the NFIP, National Flood Insurance Program, and map revisions just in general, how you read the maps and how you move forward with them. So that's kind of cool. That gives you some background there. Then why obtain a map revision? Well, really 3 reasons. If there's fill or excavation in the floodplain due to your project, outdated studies that are disputed in some way, that's another reason for a map revision. And then unstudied, so those zone A's where I talked about the approximate areas where there's no real effective study out there, that would be another reason. Okay, then getting a little deeper into the map revision manual, we have different ways that we calculate the hydrologic calculations and the hydraulic. So hydrologic is how the water runs off when it's raining, and where does it go, and how much water runs off. So we get into that. And then hydraulics is how, once the water's on the ground, how does the waterway react to it with the bridges and with the channel geometry. Then we have submittal checklists, pre-submittal meeting topics, and then websites. Then getting more into the appendices, I've got this way of refining the Huff quartiles. When you submit, we require critical duration, we require the Huff quartiles for the rainfall distributions. And then there's other appendices, which the discharge certification form, and then other submittal information. We'll talk about that really quickly. And I apologize to the slide. This is like, what? What are you doing? Why would you do this? Well, let's look at it on another level, okay? First off, this is chaos to try to describe right now in this type of situation. But let's simplify. You're going to get the effective model from FEMA. You're going to contact the FEMA Map Service Center. If you Google it, you'll be able to do that, and request the map, the effective map for the Des Plaines River. Okay, they'll send you that digital model. They'll send you the hydrology and the hydraulics. Then you're going to take and you're going to add detail. When you add detail, you no longer have the effective model. You have what we call the modified. It's modified by you dropping in cross sections that are more what today's model is. They probably studied the Des Plaines River back in, I don't know, 1995 or something. That's a long time ago. And so you're gonna increase the accuracy with your model, with your cross sections for existing conditions. Then you're gonna drop in your project. That's called the with project model. So there's 3 types of models that you're gonna submit to us every time you're gonna update a FEMA model. Okay, you're gonna get the effective, modified effective, then with project. That's all you really need to know about this. And whenever that happens and you run your model, if the base flood elevations go down as a result of your efforts, whether it's the modified effective or the with project model, you have to update the hydrology. Why? Well, you've just lowered the flood elevation. That has a lot of implications. And in FEMA world, that's a big problem because people are going to build to that new elevation. So we have to make sure that the hydrology or the rainfall is accurate going into your final product. Okay, again, all this is really saying is, when is a review of a map revision request required by us? Only if you are draining more than a square mile, or if you're changing the flows or the water surface elevations by more than 1/10 of a foot. Okay, what the heck is this? This is websites, and the 2 I've highlighted to the right are probably the best websites that are out there that's going to help you with your submittal. One being the FEMA NFHL, National Flood Hazard Layer. It's a great site for you to know the most up-to-date map. And by that I mean, see this little blue like polygon? Okay, here we go. See that little blue polygon? That is a letter of map revision. Someone has already gone through the submittal process and updated that overall waterway with new information. And there's a date on it. So, wow. Okay, so you can get a copy of that. If your project was in that area, you have an advantage of a more recent update or revision. So the NFHL is great. It's a good, and it's what we use oftentimes just to check where is the floodway and the floodplain. Then the other side I'm referencing on this slide is the USGS stream stats. And remember we talked about Zone A, or approximate area. This particular website, stream stats, will give you an estimated peak flow for all the frequencies, 5-year all the way up to the 500-year flow, using similar streams that have stream gauges on them. That's why they say stream stats is statistics for similar streams. And they have equations that can approximate that. And so it's a great source. We can't always just accept it, but it's a great check against your model. So you're going to run a detailed model and then go, hey, well, what the heck? Let me get on stream stats and see what they say. It also delineates the watershed area upstream of your project, which is really important and helpful. Then the other websites, you'll see, let's see, there's the survey system that gives you the section, township, and range. FEMA Map Center is a great site. That's for you to get the effective map. The Elevation Finder is a site where you can, you have got like a photo area in front of you, and you can ding it, and it'll give you a ground elevation up to 1/10 of a foot. So it's pretty cool. You can really get a good idea of some of the issues right around your project. Then our office, and okay, a real quick shout out for the Illinois State Water Survey. They have a group of probably 30 or 40 engineers down there. They are hired by FEMA to update floodplain maps, and they are amazing. What they do, what they turn out, the quality of it, and the amount of work they do. I'll get into, again, I'm going to have another slide on them specifically. Okay, what is he talking about here? This is, the Huff quartiles only publish 20 values, but when you're running your hydrology, you have to sometimes define your rainfall downs in series of 5-minute intervals. So, well, how are you going to get 5-minute intervals out of 20 values associated with that particular storm? Well, one way to do it, it's math, but it's easy math, okay? You're going to take, and it looks more complicated than it really is, and I can give you an Excel spreadsheet, which no problem. They can plug in your project and you can come up with these distributions real easily. Huff has 4 quartiles, first, second, third, and fourth, which are shown in that upper right drawing. And all they do is they're slightly front loading or back loading the intensity of a particular storm. Okay, this is a little bit of a shout out to the Illinois State Water Survey. I review their work. I've been doing it for a couple years, and like, wow. Okay, for instance, to the left, you're going to see unstudied McDonough County. It's a rural county, I get it, but they studied something like 300 miles of unstudied waterway, and they did it in a fairly short amount of time by using LiDAR data. So they have GIS people that can cut cross sections, and they come up with not just the BFE, but they have flows. So they're assigning, it's sort of a limited detailed study. That's what we used to call it for FEMA. And they did a great job on that. Then Turtle Creek was a very contentious study. It's right at the border with Wisconsin, and this particular study has issues because there's a railroad that acts like a levee, but it's not a certified levee. So how you model that is dodgy, and it's not always that easy, but they came up with it, and then you have to get community buy-in, which they had some pretty intense meetings with them, with Rockford. Dam safety program, quick broad brush on this. We do have a dam safety program, and that really involves a couple things. We define a dam as a man-made obstruction, walls, embankments, barriers, together with their abutments and appurtenant works designed, constructed for the purpose of storing and diverting water or creating a pool. That's our definition of a dam. It's not just excavation. We categorize dams by size and hazard. And reports are written, O&M, operation and maintenance reports are required for dams because they're it's very important to do that. So kind of, again, quickly going through this. What is the hazard classification? Class 1, 2, and 3. Class 1 would be high probability of loss of life, and I'll show you a picture of one, Lake in the Hills Dam, in a second. And kind of almost comically, but not, they've reviewed that as imagine a baby sleeping in the lower part of the house, maybe it's a basement, and if that water comes in to the point where that child could be drowned, we just simply classify it as loss of life. Then there's moderate loss of life and property damage, and then low probability would be no problem. And then when do we require a permit? Well, there's 3 categories of when we require permits. One is the construction of a new dam, modification or removal of dams, which is a kind of a program that we have now in the DNR. We're trying to remove as many dams as possible, and it's quite a battle on the Fox. But we feel the removal of any dam is going to be way better for the environment, for fish migration, and many other issues. And it does seem like those dams are, and they're dangerous. I mean, people have died in the boil of the downstream of that dam. So I don't get it. Why? Well, I do. People have gotten accustomed to those dams. They think they're pretty, and they think that they give them some great amenity. Well, there's other issues that would say that's simply not true. So an existing dam is defined as September 2, 2080. This is the Lake in the Hills Dam, which interestingly in 1993, it almost breached. And you can see there's a house right at the base of the dam. So this is a high hazard dam. And I went back and I took a look at what happened actually, and hundreds of people showed up and they put in sandbags. That was against the operation and maintenance manual. You're supposed to allow the water to go out, and they were just backing it up. So the dam could have failed from what they were doing. They put several feet of sandbags, which ended up, luckily, the dam didn't fail, and luckily everything worked out well. So operation and maintenance for any of these dams, especially such as this situation, have been modified to the point where now they better understand what they're doing. They don't just do whatever they want to do or whatever a group of people think that should be done. Certainly they were very well-meaning. There's no doubt about that. But the analysis of dams is a big topic, and that's something that we handle with our dam safety program. Class 2 dams, they're just also, and then low hazard dams will just be like a very small dam that's probably holding back water for farming issues and things like that. Okay, public waters. Public waters, basically we have 3 types. We have natural waterways, we have waterways improved for navigation, and then we have man-made waterways, such as the I&M Canal and Sanitary Ship Canal. We only have certain allowable activities in public waters because we're trying to protect the public's rights and impairments, and so there's a quick list of different types of projects that we would allow. Otherwise, no, there would be no fill to be placed in public waters. We have to look carefully at the temporary coffer dams. We just had a big project on the Fox in Geneva, where the railroad wanted to add a 3rd rail, and so they put in causeways underneath the existing bridge to allow for the equipment to get in there. So we had to look at that very carefully, and we still have some issues with removing the rock that they put in that they just allowed to blow downstream, so we have to take a look at that. Public notice is required. There's no delegation for that. We talked about that really quick. Now, what is the 20-day public notice period? Well, I mean, the background for that? Well, if there's any map revisions or flood profile changes, if there are projects in public water, or if there's dam modifications, we require a 21-day public notice. And basically, this is an example of when we put together a dialogue of that, and then we have on our website, more information about that. Public waters, here's a quick list. It's not comprehensive, but it gives you kind of a snapshot of what is a public water. These are all the major rivers in Illinois, kind of a quick look at them. And then in northeastern Illinois, we have CAUSE, the Chicago Area Waterway, which there's a lot of interconnectivity in there and a lot of man-made adjustments for discharging water back and forth into Lake Michigan. Allegation Water, Lake Michigan, there's 3 main reasons why we would do that. Domestic water supply, more and more you're going to, I know Bartlett, for instance, just picked up Lake Michigan water maybe 3 years ago, and it's expensive. It's a lot more expensive than our other water, but it's great. It's really good water. And so that is an allocation. So the city of Chicago allows for communities under very careful supervision, that's part of what we do, is we have to make sure that there isn't a lot of leakage in the system. For instance, Joliet wants to get water, and we can't quite give it to them because their leakage is like, I don't know, 15% or something. The water would just be going back into the ground. So we are trying to make sure that indeed that the communities can minimize leakage. Okay, direct diversion for navigation on the side-and-side ship canal, they're allowed to let water out from Lake Michigan into the canal and to improve water quality in the canal. And a lot of what helps the United States is there's the longest running Supreme Court, which is still ongoing, case has to do with this particular project, with Lake Michigan allocation. It's just, I guess it's never going to end. I don't know why it's still going. But basically, one way for us to say that we're allowed to remove water is we can calculate the amount of water flowing into the Lake Michigan on adjacent watersheds. This is contact information. Bill Boyd is my boss in Bartlett, and then Steve Altman is my second boss. he is down Springfield, and then Bill Milner is also involved with permitting. So, we have any questions? This is our fiduciary cat helping us on the 1040 form, I think it was, where he was showing where to sign, so it was very helpful. So, is there any questions? Yes?
You mentioned that IDNR doesn't necessarily care that much if you're reducing water levels, like say like a culvert project and you're upsizing the culvert, but then FEMA does care.
They do, yeah.
So would you have to apply for an IDNR permit and go through like the FEMA HOMAR process separately?
Yeah, well, we would simply say, let's say it wasn't jurisdictional, definitely we wouldn't be involved. We would probably not be involved if it was lowering it, but Chris Hanstead over at State Water Survey is very interested in it. So even if you're lowering it more than a tenth, then he's going to say, yeah, and certainly if there's a floodway. I'm sorry, if there's a floodway on the waterway. If there's no floodway, he'll just be like, great, thanks for giving us a flood elevation, even though you're lowering it. And you would know that, but he would be like, thanks for the detail. But if there is a floodway drawn and you're lowering it, he'll really want to know. Because FEMA, he'll require a CLOMAR and a LOMAR to follow up. Sure. Okay, well, thanks for being patient. Sort of a lot of stuff here.
We are now at the time where we got a little bit of a break, so feel free to help yourself to coffee, restrooms. We're going to have some panel discussions, so be back here around 10:15, 10:20 to get those started. If I can get the local boots on the ground panel just to come up quick before maybe around 10:10, and we should be good to go for the next upcoming part. Thanks. All right, so once we got everybody settled in, we're going to have our presenters. This is our boots on the ground. So we have contractors, engineers, professionals in the soil erosion sediment control and natural resources game to kind of come in here and answer a few questions. Depending on the time that we have at the end, we may have a little bit of time for some additional questions from the crowd. So think of those if you have any. We'll keep an eye on the time to see exactly how many we'll be able to support with that. So I'm going to pass it on over to the panel to kind of get started with introductions, and should be good to go from there. You just want to go down the line? Yeah, start down the right.
I'll see if I can. All right, hello. Everybody here okay on this one? All right, so my name is Jeremy Husnick. I'm with Hay & Associates, a consulting firm out of Northern Illinois. In my 28th year there, and my position is the field services manager. That covers survey, lakes, water quality, UAV, and erosion control. So I've been probably doing erosion control inspections and consulting for about the past 22 years.
Morning, everyone. I'm Maya Blauer. I'm a senior civil engineer with Lake County Stormwater Management Commission. my main job is to be boots on the ground from a regulatory perspective. So I inspect a lot of construction sites to be in compliance with our local ordinance, and when delegated by U.S. Army Corps of Engineers with their requirements as well. I've been with the commission since 2018, but I got my start in Soil and Water District, so they have a soft spot in my heart. That's why I like coming back and participating. And that's about it. I also review erosion and sediment control plans on permits that are delegated to SMC from the Army Corps of Engineers. And I also manage our designated erosion control inspector program, which is a Lake County program. And yeah, we do a lot of trainings as well. I'm in charge of a lot of it. And it's fun coming back here to share a lot of the information and knowledge.
Hi there. My name is Erin Pandy. I'm with Engineering Resource Associates. It's a consulting firm out of Warrenville, Illinois, so that northeastern Illinois area. I am a principal and environmental manager at ERA, and my team mainly works on environmental restoration projects, so a lot of stream bank stabilization, remeander projects. And then we also do a lot of decking inspections and soil erosion control inspections for a variety of projects that are under construction, as well as assist with our structural team that does a lot of bridge replacements over waterways.
I'm Ryan Altop. I'm with NCAP Incorporated. I'm the operations director for the company. Been with them for about 16 years now. Kind of grew up in the construction industry, have done everything from inspections to design work to construction throughout the entire Midwest and as far away as New York and Arizona, and but most of the career in the Midwest.
Hello, everyone. I'm Derek Brame with Resource Environmental Solutions, operations manager in Illinois. So yeah, we're an ecological heavy construction contractor in the Midwest. A lot of our focus has to do with, water system restoration, so a lot of stream work, wetland mitigation banking, shoreline ravine stabilization, stuff like that. So also act as the direct project manager on a lot of our major construction projects, so work closely with Tommy, and I'm the guy kind of submitting the in-stream work plans and getting through that process with these guys. So.
Hi, I'm Dave Bush. I'm Chief of Construction for Kane County. We do a lot of work very closely with Kane DuPage. I'm responsible for managing and overseeing the capital improvement projects for the county, which are usually around 20 to 35 million a year on 15 to 20 projects or so. Our annual improvements include intersection improvements, structure rehab replacement, add lanes, new alignments, as well as annual maintenance and safety enhancements. I've got 4 full-time professionals along with a bunch of consulting engineers to help us with our workload. I've been with the county for 24 years and have built some of the largest and most complex projects in the state. Stearns Corridor and Long Meadow Corridor are 2 of such, which had major erosion and sedimentation issues that we had to aggressively address in order to prevent commingling and a lot of other issues that get involved in such large projects. Each of these projects was anywhere from 3 to 10 years in duration. It took a long time to build. And that's it.
All right, thanks. So we got roughly 10 or so questions for the panel here, and then we'll kind of open it up to see how much time we have after. These questions are kind of free-for-all. I'll point it towards anybody if they're looking for anything specific. But the first one we have are what are some key erosion concerns with causeways, and then what recommendations would you have for planning and inspections for overall functions of causeways? And just feel free to jump in if you want.
So yeah, I guess I can kind of take this one. This one has my name on it. Coming from recent experience here, so we were the firm that did the Carpentersville Dam removal, worked with KDSWCD to develop the in-stream water management plan for that removal. Obviously, the main measure for that removal was a causeway. So, main concerns for erosion control around causeways, I would say that that's going to basically be your means and methods around the installation and removal. Once a causeway is set up correctly, it should pretty much function. You shouldn't really have any sedimentation, pluming, or anything like that. So it's really your means and methods on how you do your installation and your removal of that. So in terms of, best methods for installation, obviously, this is after all your careful planning and whatnot, but, let's say you selected the right size gradation, the right aggregate and all that stuff to make sure it's stable. Your method for placing that causeway really dictates how much sediment you're kicking up and sending downstream during that installation. And so what we found was the best method is basically your dump, spread, and drive out method. So, definitely keying that causeway into the bank where you're starting. So you're, above your flood elevation up there. So you're designed above your 2-year on the bank that you're starting at. You dump, you shape it, and then you basically drive out on it and dump again. But our recommendation is do not dump directly onto the native riverbed. Dump at the edge of your causeway, and then, gently, carefully place that stone to extend your causeway with the backhoe excavator. What we realize is that really limits the amount of pluming during the installation phase of it. And then for the removal phase, our project was a little bit different where we were actually keeping that causeway stone in place as a rock grade transition at the end of the project. But, similar method, just be gentle with it, I guess is all I can say. Remove the excess, but then also just as you're placing what's staying, be gentle with it, limit your pluming. We did run into a situation too where all you guys know, the rock coming from quarries has a lot of finite dust on it. We actually had to pre-wash that rock in a parking lot in our staging area. The first load we tried just, sent a nice big white plume downstream. So we switched up our plan pretty much immediately and started washing all the loads in our staging area before placing in the water system. So, that's like the main thing. I mean, once it's set up, you don't really have any major erosion control concerns or issues as long as you're designing for a 2-year event. You're keying into those banks so it can't scour around your causeway. Another big thing with this is the planning. Like, I can't stress that enough. So, really understanding your flows. So, do you need equalizer pipes running through your causeway, or can you select a gradation where the pore space allows that natural, the standard flow to just flow through it, right? So really understanding what you need in terms of pipes or vented areas, understanding the gradation of your stone. Do you need to wash it? That kind of depends on how it's coming from the quarry. Another big thing that could lead to erosion control issues is if you have to redo, right? So really understanding where you need to gain access for your full project area, and really choosing an alignment of that causeway that gets you access to all your areas you need to, but also limits the footprint, because that's what's kicking up the most of your sediment during the installation, right? So if you can choose, your quickest, fastest, easiest approach that gains you all that access but limits your footprint, you will result in less sedimentation floating downstream. Worst case scenario would be if you have to redo it, right? So if you don't plan it out well enough and you got to rip the whole thing up and redo, again, just really adding to additional pluming that could have been avoided if it's planned correctly. So yeah, you basically want to install it once. Moving, adjusting, rebuilding's not your best situation. Another thing would be failures, right? So, let's say you decide to not go with equalizer pipes and you get a major blowout. You're then, building additional causeway to go grab that rock that you're chasing downstream, bring it back. Again, just additional disturbance that could be avoided. Obviously, timing is super, super important with causeway installation, especially with this project, with us going all the way across the Fox River with it. Really lining up the project period to be during the low flows. So really looking at, 10, 15 years of historical flow data and deciding what months are going to give you your best chance of success. And then also kind of designing in a contingency, right? So let's say you do get some higher flow periods during that time period that you selected, just making sure your causeway is designed to withstand those higher flows. I think Tommy kind of mentioned it, during normal flows, it's kind of flowing through your causeway, but During max flows, it's typically flowing up and over that causeway, making sure all your materials that are staged out there are removed from the river during those high flows. And then also just making sure your causeway is a gradation in size and width and correct side slopes to withstand some max flows so it doesn't cause any major blowouts. That's kind of the main stuff there. Recommendations for planning, inspections. I mean, inspections, basically got to happen daily on a system like this. A lot of your guys on the ground, obviously your operators, they're working on it, they're driving over it. They're going to see any issues right away and just making sure that they're addressing those issues before it gets worse. And that's about it. Obviously, safety also huge priority. So I know I say like, try and limit the footprint of your causeway, but also at the same time, you got to make sure that that footprint is stable enough to support the machines that you're going to be planning on using and stuff like that. So yeah, what we figured out with, we used RR5 stone on this specific project. We needed to have 2-to-1 side slopes on this one to make sure, it wasn't sloughing out on you as you were putting 80,000-pound machines on it. So really, it just really comes down to planning, understanding the flows, understanding the timing, and then really executing it with your means and methods to try and limit that pluming during installation and deconstruction of it. So,
with RR5 being larger stone, did you guys have to top cap that with anything? No, you were able to traverse it?
Yeah, we rolled it on the top, so it still provided a flat enough surface for us. We really wanted to try and avoid any smaller materials and fines like that. Because there were periods during that project that, absolutely flow was increased, and so it was no longer flowing underneath it and through it. It was coming over the top of it. So avoiding that capstone was kind of one of our priorities as well.
We didn't cap the stone on our causeways for sterns either. I think the smallest rock we had was 3 inch, and we just dealt with it.
Yeah. Obviously, it comes down to machine selection, I would say. If you're running a smaller excavator or something like that, some of that irregularity could affect your operations, but with the bigger machines we were using, you don't really notice it. So. And then another suggestion is just like reach out to folks in the industry that, have experience doing it. So when I was working with Tommy to get our in-stream plan approved, there was a proposed causeway system. The design was done by V3. And, right off the bat, we actually proposed a different system. They showed equalizer pipes in their causeway. And, in order for equalizer pipes to take effect in this project, you'd have had to have had a gap between the dam itself and your causeway to allow kind of a trench or a slough to direct water to those equalizer pipes. That would have caused us to be 40, 50 feet away from the actual dam we needed to demo. So due to just, again, like really kind of understanding what access you need, we had to propose a causeway that would allow us to build that causeway right up against the dam to be able to reach everything we needed to demo. And so we proposed taking out those equalizer pipes, and the way we offset that is by upsizing the gradation. So it was originally calling for RR4. We proposed taking out those equalizer pipes, building it up against the dam, and then increased our rock size to increase pore space to, basically handle that direct flow impact that was coming over the dam. So, what led us to that was reaching out to one of our subcontractors that we work with out east a lot, who's done over 80 dam removals with his company. And we basically approached him by saying, like, is this possible? Is it possible to have equalizer pipes not in your causeway? And he's like, yes, we do it all the time. You just got to make sure your rock selection is good enough where your pore space can, handle that flow. So, before even approaching Tommy, with this plan that was different from the engineered plan, we reached out to contacts that had experience doing it, and he kind of directed us in a way that led to a great project and a successful project. So, yeah, definitely reaching out and getting advice from others is definitely recommended if you haven't done it before. So,
Yeah, thanks, Derek. So we'll move on. Next question here. So what advice would you give a potential contractor who has to build a causeway in a creek to help them stay in compliance with environmental permits and to minimize the impacts on the stream? I'll just kind of open that up to anybody in there.
Well, this one has my name on it. Well, I don't know what else I can add to what Derek already covered in detail, but I would say one of the most important things in any project, and is one BMP that will work on any project, no matter what the project is, Can you guys guess what it is? Doesn't matter what it is, what time of the year, what project you have, there's one BMP that will work above all. Communication. Okay, proper communication with all the parties involved is paramount to having a successful project. We at SMC have a requirement in our permits to have a pre-construction meeting. Okay, and I always make a point of it to make sure that the contractor is always present. Because, yeah, you know, you can have the greatest plan put together with the greatest design, with the greatest engineer, but if it doesn't get implemented properly, you'll have issues down the road. So I always ask for the contractor who's gonna be actually doing the work to be present so we all understand what the expectations are, what constitutes a potential violation, what their means and methods are, and SMC does not dictate what the means and methods are, but we require to have an approved plan before they start the work. So, you know, it could be, the plan could be on the plan, just like Derek said, but maybe it's not the best plan for the conditions on site. So we ask that a plan it's reviewed and approved by SMC be submitted prior to starting the work. Also, given that you're working in such sensitive environment and sensitive conditions, inspection is paramount. If you pick a contractor that doesn't know or hasn't done the work in stream conditions, there's high potential of having violations and redos and adding cost. And just to back up a little bit, you know, having a lot of the erosion and sediment control measures on the plan as part of the pay items too, because let's say you're halfway through the project and you have to dewater, and all of a sudden you need polymers, but you haven't tested the soil, and all of a sudden your cost is gonna go incrementally. So having that forethought to have all the measures in the plan is very important, and then having a contractor that understands how to use those methods and measures to make sure that, you know, we don't have violations down the road. And, you know, stuff happens. You know, you get a huge rain event that you didn't account for in the middle of summer, right? Is, you know, responding right away. Even if you have, you know, a discharge down the stream, making sure that you take account and take care of those issues immediately so it doesn't happen again. And obviously, keeping communication open with the enforcement agency, with the regulatory agency, so we can all be on the same page as far as like, how do we move forward step by step so the project gets done, you know, simply and correctly and without violations.
Thank you. So moving on to the next question here, what issues of noncompliance are you most commonly seeing over the course of projects? Aaron, if you want to take a stab at this one.
Yeah, I'll start off on this one. I guess I'll divide this into a couple of different projects, small site projects and then maybe stream projects, since we're kind of focusing a little bit on Causeways here today. So small sites, generally we see a lot of using filter fabric or straw bales around inlets still, which is surprising. I think that there was an issue with getting inlet baskets this summer because we were seeing many instances of that. Other issues as well include the construction entrances and tracking of sediment or material out onto the roadway and not having it swept is something that we see quite often. And then from a planning perspective, in areas where there's a high slope, where the area is going to be disturbed, we will often see kind of rills forming along those slopes, and then the sediment builds up against the silt fence, and then, you know, the silt fence falls, and then you lose sediment from the site. So those are pretty common things that we're seeing from like a small site standpoint. From a stream bank stabilization standpoint or stream remeandering standpoint, one thing that I see is often we'll kind of segment the stream and do a portion at a time and then kind of march up or downstream. And so you're kind of moving your bypass system up or downstream. And from the get-go, they usually do a pretty good job of putting in the sump pit and putting the outfall for the bypass on stabilized ground, but they kind of start to get lazy as they move up or downstream. So I have gone out on site and seen, where they just threw the pump in without the sump pit, and you're sucking up mud, right? Or they're just outfalling onto the bank where it's maybe not stabilized and the bank isn't stabilized. So those are some common things that I see with stream bypass. Anyone else?
Anybody else have anything to add or they want to add for that one? If not, we can move on to the next one. Sure, there's plenty of things that we'll see, but we'll get to that on the end too. All right, so the next question we have are how often are plans being reviewed and updated to accurately reflect the current on-site conditions? And also what methods would you recommend to keep those inspections and plan updates organized?
Okay, that's got my name on it. So we inspect all this stuff daily. We change things as needed, especially if there are changes in conditions, and they're addressed immediately. Proper use of BMPs helps with that kind of stuff. It's just basically just being diligent and staying on top of it and making sure that you understand, the contractor understands what you expect from them, and go from there.
Anything else to add from any of the panel?
I guess from a contractor standpoint would be, we propose our in-stream work plan methods. When it changes for us is when one of those methods just doesn't work. Even if it was reviewed and approved, there's definitely a gap between reviewing and approving something on a plan set in the computer to how it's actually functioning in the field. And so I would just say that that's the main reason we kick in changes from our approved in-stream plan, is if one of our proposed methods doesn't work, then it's just a quick call to Tommy or something like that, or a quick email saying, hey, this method's not working. Here's our new proposed method, get that approved and see if that one works. A little bit of trial and error, but as long as the contractor is responsible and doesn't just force something that's not working even though it was approved, I think that's the main thing there, is just reacting to how your measures are working, essentially.
And then as you do those reactions, to go ahead and make sure you're marking up your plans, keeping it current in your SWIP, so that if you do come out and get inspected, this isn't we just felt like doing that. It's we decided this was an intelligent thought, this had some forethought and planning to it, rather than just we guessed at it kind of thing.
Yeah, and keep the regulatory agency in the loop as well, because, if I approve the plan, and I come out there and it's completely different, I don't like to be taken up by surprise. So yeah, just a quick email saying, hey, this isn't working, sediment is going down the stream, or there's a high potential there will, here's an updated plan. So then we're like, okay, great. So.
Yeah, projects that where environmentally sensitive areas are involved, we'll have a weekly meeting with all the parties involved. It's all set up and organized, and then plans will be revised, and then it'll go off to the village or whoever, a county, for approval. So it's as the projects progress, everything changes all the time. So there might be a wetland or a lake that is going to take on water, possibly. So it has to be all accounted for, and then just make sure that, like Leah said, the regulators are in the loop. There are no surprises.
We had a bunch of erosion issues on Stearns and Longmeadow both, where we ended up actually sodding a couple acres of land that was so severe, so sloped that it was racing down the construction area and commingling with the quarries. So that was hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not $1 million, just to sod all that. And then we did triple heavy-duty silt fences on the Longmeadow corridor because, again, we had such severe rain events that the first armored silt fence would collapse and shatter, and the second one would catch it, and that would shatter, and the third one would hold tight. So sometimes you have to do stuff that looks just nuts, but it's got to get done.
Mm-hmm. All right. So when do you see a majority of in-stream work occurring in Illinois? And then what percentage of those projects do you see that are scheduled or projected that go over their timelines?
So I have honestly seen in-stream work happen at any time during the growing season and throughout the winter. We did a couple miles up in Glacial Park all during the winter. The real kicker to it is paying attention to the weather, making sure you're coordinating. You know, if you see the big storm coming, getting the site buttoned up, making sure that nothing is, you know, like he was saying, nothing sitting on top of the causeway, getting ready to wash downstream. If you've got open ground, getting that stabilized as fast as possible. You know, projects really, if they're planned appropriately, shouldn't be running over. Very rarely should that be happening. The planning is really the kicker to it, having the materials sitting there ready. If you're gonna do in-stream work, you've gotta have everything ready to go and ready to rock and roll so that you're not sitting there going, oh, the blanket delivery got delayed by a week and a half and I now have a mile of open stream bed that, you know, or stream bank that could erode. You know, those are things that you have to have sitting there waiting. The planning is really the kicker to making sure you don't end up in a project schedule overrun situation. As far as in-stream work, I mean, the ideal time to do it is going to be August, you know, when we haven't had rain for 3 weeks and you're at your lowest point of flow. But there's also extenuating circumstances like that project in Glacial Park. They had Blanding's turtles on that site and they were worried about them being hit by the machines, honestly. And we had a whole project and procedure for what to do if we found Blanding's turtles on that project. You know, so there's some other extenuating circumstances that do occur throughout projects, but ideally low flow situations is what you're shooting for.
Yeah, I'll add to that. With the threatened and endangered species and tree removals, if you don't plan ahead and get your tree removals done within that time period where they're not roosting, sometimes that can push your project to start until after that period. So you're looking at an October timeframe. So lately, I've seen some projects be built more in that fall, winter timeframe than necessarily in the summer, which is a little bit more ideal. So if you know in advance and you can plan and get a letter of permission to remove trees within that period of time in the winter when they're not roosting, and then the following summer do your project, that would be ideal.
All right, so kind of piggybacking off that last question, so what items or issues have you found in past projects that could significantly delay any of that work taking place, either in a waterway or just in general?
All right, so, you know, with everything else, the big thing that we find that are, you know, holding things up are, and what's been talked about also is, you know, the in-stream measures, you know, maybe unforeseen design issues with regards to weather. It seems like lately, you know, past several years, we're getting shorter, harder rain events. It's flashing streams, things like that. Any of the causeways or just any of your BMPs just need to be designed for that increase in flow. You know, it's usually fast flow. But, you know, even with anything, project we have up in Antioch, it's just, you know, there's 30 acres of open ground just because of the way the grading had to happen. All the water was going to a basin. It's about an acre long basin, you know, in volume. Well, it's about 7 acre feet worth of water that was in there in the end with all these rainstorms that we had. And we had to end up stopping and deploying a flocate system, polymer, to dewater this basin into a lake to the north. And they had 2 trailers going. It's a slow process to get that water to go through and flocculate out, you know, and changing all the jute mat and everything. But it took probably, you know, a month and a half. The project still, you know, went on, but you know, finishing the plumbing for the basin and things like that had to wait until all the water was dewatered, you know, safely and cleanly, I guess. So, I mean, that month and a half probably cost an extra $60,000 just in polymer and the trailer rentals, things like that.
All right, so kind of looking at some of the more in-stream, so If you've worked with pipe stream bypass systems, do you see that they work effectively, or what are some of the major limitations to this setup?
You want to go first?
I can start if you don't mind.
Go for it.
So pipe stream bypass systems, honestly, I'm not a huge fan of them. It does work, but if there's an alternate method, I would choose it first. Basically, you're gonna have to match that flow rate, and I mean, if it's calculated improperly beforehand by whomever did the calculations, it can be a significant cost overrun on a project. Where if you can't get the elevations right, there's a lot of things that could go wrong with a bypass system. It's one of those things that I would use for a short-term project, but it's not something, if I knew I was gonna have to keep a stream bed open or a stream bank open for long-term, I would prefer to try something different.
We've had very mixed results with pipe bypass systems, depending on how they're constructed and how they're installed. I've actually had contractors try and stick a pipe right through the center of the project, and you just scratch your head, and you're like, well, how are you gonna get around all this when you gotta build it? Which solved itself because the pipe collapsed and the area that was small got bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, and pretty soon we were just this huge pit. So we prefer a channeled system that's lined with rock and everything. We have had very nice success with those. They're easy to maintain, they're easy to watch, they're easy to fix as compared to a pump around or a pipe system.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. With, a small system, a small stream where, there's little to no flow, that is feasible. But if you're looking at any stream that's got a large amount of flow coming through it, that you're going to have some challenges. So ideally, take a look around adjacent to the project and see if there's the ability to do a bypass channel. 9 times out of 10, that's the better option.
All right, so this one's pretty much for everybody here. So how are you voicing disagreement with differing or opposing viewpoints from the planning process, the implementation, to the approved plan, to what's being actually implemented on the field?
I can start on this one. And I would say that disagreement or differing viewpoint starts at the review process. So if the engineer proposes something on the plan and we, as a regulatory agency, we feel like that's insufficient or not enough, we would give comments back. So it should start early in the process to make sure that the engineer and eventually the contractor understands what natural resources need to be protected. When we're satisfied and we approve the permit, then comes the actual implementation. And a lot of times for me, if I get a plan that's, let's say, a dewatering plan or a bypass plan I'm kind of iffy on it, I don't tell them what to do. I ask more questions. So you think that this will work and won't create issues downstream? Or do you think this bypass will work enough to withstand, like, if we get a big rain event? So I try to ask as many questions to kind of get the idea in the contractor's mind as to kind of foresee the problems. So I can offer my professional opinion, but because we don't dictate means and methods, we leave it up to the contractor, but if it doesn't work, then we're in a bigger problem, and then they will eventually have to implement more measures to take care of the issues. So that's one way. That's my way.
As a contractor, honestly, it's just communication over and over again. Like Mia said, to start with, keeping the regulators involved the entire time is very important. It'll make your life 100 times easier, if not 1,000 times easier. And just having that open line of communication all the time is, it's a great thing. If they know that they can trust you as a contractor, sometimes when they get to that situation, they're like, are you sure this is what you want to do? You can go, yeah, we're pretty confident this is what we want to do. This is going to work. And if you have that past history of, this is going to work, typically they'll go, okay, let's try it and see if it works. And you know, if they know at that point you're taking that on your shoulders, and if you need to make that change or you need to make a change in process, you will make those changes.
And that makes me as a regulator more at ease. The contractor knows that, you know, I've done this several times and it works, then I can breathe more easily. There's not going to be issues down the road. So there's got to be a level of trust between the regulators and the contractors. And some of us work, you know, on many projects over the years, and you can kind of tell where that level of trust is. So it's, yeah, that's important. Communication is very important.
Yeah, I guess, yeah, I'll kind of echo that. You know, a lot of this, you know, having differing viewpoints kind of comes into play, like they said at the beginning, when you're trying to get your in-stream work plan approved and whatnot. I think, yeah, what's worked best for us is just, you know, approaching to have a conversation, not to really try and force a different means and methods on the regulators or the design agency. It's more of really trying to come from a point of understanding of, you know, what is their goal with this specific approach or measure. And then if you still have a different viewpoint on how to best achieve that goal, you know, just voicing that and explaining your reasoning, you know, behind your, you know, proposed means and methods. It's not always, this is how we're going to do it, and you can't tell us means or methods. It's more of an open, honest conversation and understanding where they're coming from, and then almost kind of marrying that up with where you're coming from. So a lot of times it's almost meeting in the middle, you know, taking the best parts of what's on the plans and taking the best parts of in-field experience from the contractor and matching those two up is what gives you the most success. So again, yeah, it comes down to communication and trust, really.
You have to be careful when you communicate with a contractor about giving him direction to do something, because then you've assumed the responsibility and the financial burden of what you just recommended. So when they come back to you and ask you for another $100,000 and you go, what's that for? It's what you told me to do. So we've learned over the years that it's much more beneficial to kind of spark their memory or spark their brain and say, hey, does this look safe? Does this look right? Do you really think this is going to work? And if it isn't, what's your backup plan? And kind of get them involved in it, so it's not so much a regulation where you got to do this and you're going to do this, and they're just going to turn around and say, well, I want more money. So there's always that.
All right. I'm sure everybody's got an answer for this one. We'll try and keep it quick if possible. Are there any particular projects or case studies you can point to examples for navigating complex projects, maintaining compliance, balancing environmental protection, overall project viability?
Well, this one's got my name on it. I guess think outside the box, right? So a lot of these projects where there's bypass, there may be another system nearby that can be utilized in order to bypass the stream. So I'm going to call out, I don't know if Greg is here or not, but I'm going to call out Greg Ulrich, who worked heavily with DuPage County to get an agreement to actually bypass Klein Creek through their reservoir. So it involved kind of backing up the entire system into a lake and then pumping over a huge berm into the reservoir, which then siphoned under and then went back into the creek further downstream. So it was a complex system, but it worked really, really well. So that's kind of out of the box. Like normally when you do these, well, like let's just dig a channel or use a pipe bypass. We actually used the existing infrastructure and then routed it around the entire the creek. Another project I'm going to bring up is we do the decking inspections for a contractor that installs a large utility. They shall remain nameless. And in order to install this utility, they need to dewater the groundwater. So they have these deep water wells that they then need to daylight, essentially, and then it drains to the Chain of Lakes system. So the water that was coming out of these was kind of milky in appearance. So and it wasn't included in the design to have a more substantial dewatering system. So we kind of had to, on the fly, work with the contractor to, get a better dewatering area put in order to eliminate some of the sediment essentially that was in the water prior to entering these channels. It was a pretty loud community. They didn't want the project to begin with. So any kind of anything that looked like it might be, have some sediment in it, it got called directly to the IEPA. So anyone else?
All right, and then last off, just for everyone, just kind of a quick little rundown. What have you found to be most effective strategy in reducing soil erosion and sedimentation on any projects?
Communication.
Yeah, there you go. Same. Do that and follow the SWIP.
Stabilization's a big one too. The sooner you can get things stabilized, the better it's going to be for you across the board. The faster you can make it green, just the better all the way around.
Even trying not to open up the whole site, just keep portions of it and maybe stage it, kind of, keep that natural, as a buffer, that natural vegetation. It's all rooted and it's, perfect.
Yeah, I would say phasing, honestly, is one of your best measures. If you phase a project appropriately, you eliminate a lot of the measures we think of, right? Needing those above ground measures. So phasing for us is one of our biggest measures we utilize. Example, on a wetland mitigation bank project, don't go break all your drain tiles right away and get the whole site to wet up, right? It's just important phasing things to think through before you break ground is a huge measure that we really see a lot of importance in.
Yes, I would agree. We had lead remediation we had to do on the Long Meadow project, which was a huge, complex process. And in the process, we had to control the rainwater that was coming off of the soil that was being treated too. So we bit off in small chunks because it would just have been too big of a thing if we had taken it all at once. So we handle things in small chunks in order to get it very carefully.
All right, I think we are right at our time for our next one. So I'd like to thank the panel for everybody for coming out. And if they are able to stick around at the end, we may have a little bit of time for Q&A at the end. We also have the networking time from 12 to 1 where we're able to be here. So I'd like to thank you all and move on to the next set.
Okay. Since Tommy's on this next panel, I will be taking over with emceeing for a little bit. So I will go ahead and let everyone for our SESC panel introduce themselves, and then we will get into the questions here. So whenever you guys are ready.
Okay. Good morning. Yes, good morning here. Bill Santelik with Lake County Stormwater Management Commission. I'm relatively new to this side of the public side of this thing. So prior to this, done 20-some years of consulting work, coordinated Tollway's ISI program. So I've been doing both wetlands and stormwater. So.
I'm Tommy Purdom, the resource conservationist for Kane, DuPage Soil and Water Conservation Districts. I've been here a little over a year and a half now and was in private sector doing aquatic habitat management before that.
My name is Patrick McPartland. You might have seen me speak at this this conference in the past. I've been with the Soil and Water District for coming up on 8 years now. I now am a part-time role. Tommy is now the RC, so if you're looking for quick feedback for stuff or things related to reviews or inspections, Tommy's the best point of contact, but still around for certain matters.
I'm Ryan Bieber. I'm with the McHenry and Lake County Soil and Water Conservation District. I do soil erosion sediment control inspections and SWIP inspections for Army Corps' permitted projects, Illinois EPA permitted projects, and McHenry County stormwater permitted projects, as well as reviewing in-stream work plans for when there is an Army Corps permit in McHenry County.
Hello, I'm Rick McCandless with the North Cook County Soil and Water Conservation District, and I do the Army Corps sediment erosion and sediment control plan review, and I do inspections.
All right, the first question here asks, what are some of the most common problems or maintenance issues that you've seen?
Well, Kane County is a big county, and when you get west of 47, it seems like is a little less oversight. So there's a lack in inspection records, or that what we talked about in that last panel about the importance of communication. There just seems to be a lack of communication in certain projects in certain communities. So I think what I'm saying there is that problems that I'm seeing is the variability between the communities, although they're all under the ILR 10, or they have their MS4s, or they're dealing with pretty similar topics or similar permits. Just how they approach that seems to be a little bit different, and that's a problem that I've seen over the years.
A lot of the stuff I've seen is stuff that's been brought up and discussed a few times already today. One of the biggest ones I see, though, is areas of exposed soil. If there's an area that's at final grade or that's been topsoiled and you're waiting for the rest of the project to get to that state before you do your permanent stabilization, that kind of stuff, if it's ready to be permanently stabilized, it should be permanently stabilized as soon as possible. Temporary stuff, if you've got large areas that aren't going to experience construction activity for a long time, those ought to get temporary stabilized. Concrete washouts and stuff that was discussed earlier in this seminar, but that's a big one too, making sure that they're set up properly or they're put in a good location. The construction entrances has been talked about a little bit too. The gentleman mentioned that a lot of them are being capped too soon. Some contractors I've spoken with, they say that a lot has to do with safety. They put a fill material at the kind of the entrance so that the tires don't spin in some of the equipment and vehicles as they're trying to enter that entrance if it's uneven from the road. But that limits its effectiveness to prevent track out, so you have to sweep your streets more. In dewatering, we talked a lot about that. No filtration, not enough filtration being released onto a stabilized surface. So there's all kinds of small things that you can see on sites, but those are some of the more common ones.
I'd have to say in that protection, and too often it's out of sight, out of mind. So if you use the basket type and it's inspected, you would say, oh yeah, there's inlet protection in. But has it been changed out? You know, it's not just the material that's accumulated, it's whether or not the fabric has clogged or not. If you go like 3 days after a storm and you see water in the bottom third or so in the basket, it definitely needs to be changed or cleaned.
One of the issues I see frequently is just adapting the construction plans to the construction site. The contractor often struggles with really understanding the intent of why is this silt fence line shown here or this check dam shown here. And, you know, it's shown here on the map or on the plan sheet, but in real world, it's 5 feet away, and some of them just understanding that, no, you don't put it over there, put it where it actually is in the real world here. So maybe that's better notes on the plan sheets, something just to explain the intent of the silt fence needs to be a foot away from the wetlands in Lake County, so you don't interfere on the impinge on the wetlands that you've said you've permitted to avoid.
Moving on to the next question here. What are some typical issues that are seen with projects while reviewing in-street work plans? And going along with that, what are some issues that have been seen while inspecting these portions of the project?
I think at least a lot of the ones that I've seen, reviewing in-stream means and methods is going to be different from reviewing the overall plans. So overall plans may have like a simple dewatering setup, but once that contractor gets approved for it, getting the means and methods and realizing the difference between that and what's going to be taking place on site, it's usually helpful to do that while on site and being able to kind of walk through and see what the options are and may be, because they may have a completely different idea of what was initially intended. So I think just being able to, like, the biggest thing is just being able to communicate both what the plan is initially what's actually feasible and what's going to be the best way to protect those resources that are on site. While inspecting, it's just making sure that a lot of those different inspections, especially in-stream portions, are going to require a little bit more monitoring as opposed to just that weekly stuff that you may see on NPDES permitted projects. A lot of time, especially if you're dewatering, you should be out there daily checking on and everything. A lot of the in-stream portions are going to require a lot more focus on the special protected resources. So it's going to require a lot more inspection, a lot more maintenance of those items to make sure nothing's going to be adversely affected.
So for reviewing the in-stream work plans, a lot of the times the locations for the dewatering is not established and how that's going to be done. So I'm always asking for that as a starting point. That's subject to change a lot in the field, but with that being said, it's important while you're out in the field and you're making those revisions that those are constantly being reflected on the on-site construction plans, if possible. And a lot of the times in these in-stream work plan reviews, there isn't a lot of mention of like worst case scenario. If the water levels were to become so high, what is the strategy to reduce the total amount of downstream impact when those water levels get too high? And that's something I like to have a conversation with early on in the construction process.
An issue I've been seeing recently with reviewing in-stream work plans is a lot of times sometimes the engineers will submit plans and say that we are going to leave the in-stream work plan up to the contractor that we hire at the later date. But you guys engineers need a letter of approval from the Soil and Water Conservation Districts for their Army Corps permit. So we'll issue a letter of contingent approval, but then sometimes it feels like the engineer isn't doing as good of a job as they might or they could be doing, explaining to their contractor what exactly has to go into their in-stream work plans. Because then when I review their plan, they seem surprised that I'm recommending all these additional things that they hadn't thought of, but the things that I recommend come from Army Corps' in-stream requirements. So if you're a contractor and you're bidding on in-stream work, it's important to know what Army Corps' requirements are. And if you're an engineer that's selecting a contractor, it's important to make sure that they know what those requirements are as well.
Yeah, I'm going to go with the dewatering again. If you're replacing a culvert on a tributary stream in a residential area and you're demoing the road, you have a very narrow right-of-way, and you have a very narrow work area. So if you don't know where if you haven't scouted ahead of time where you're going to put your dewatering operation, you're probably going to run afoul of doing it the right way. So I've seen, because a lot of times you have residential areas downstream, and I don't know if you have an agreement with the local resident or not to put a filter bag or something on their property, but it should be thought of ahead of time, for sure.
Okay. Moving on to the next question here. What parts of an in-stream work plan are not sufficiently addressed by the IUM and/or IDOT standards alone?
I think it does a decent job of addressing it because the Illinois Urban Manual provides a lot of information about what practices you could use. It doesn't tell you which ones you should use, but it has a lot of information about if you're going to use this practice, here's how it ought to be done. So I've thought that the Illinois Urban Manual does a good job of helping with in-stream work. It doesn't help you create the plan, but once you've made the plan, it tells you what those specific practices should look like and what they should be made of and how they should work.
Yeah, it's hard to say that real life conditions kind of match what is taking place on the Illinois Urban Manual. When you're trying to standardize something like a causeway and put it onto a standard drawing, it's going to be hard to generalize a lot of things and you put it some type of starting point to include in your engineering plans. So if it's a lot of the times the in-stream work plans are just going to take additional drawings or working with the contractor to come up with something to work off of. Maybe it's a different material for the cofferdam or something innovative, or maybe you're bringing in a manufacturer specification into your plan so that it exceeds the minimum requirements of the Illinois Urban Manual. That would be an instance where that could be addressed outside of the Illinois Urban Manual.
Any other feedback? Okay. Next question is, how frequently do you come across noncompliance and the need for additional or repeat inspections?
Pretty frequently. And I've been doing this for a decent amount of time, and a lot of the times it doesn't require more than a third inspection. Maybe it's a problem the first time. The second time they've come up with some type of solution or ignored it, and it's reiterated that it's a problem. But come that third inspection, it's usually resolved throughout the 2 counties that I mostly do my inspections in. And yeah, that's what I have.
Yeah, you can find a problem on a site. An inspector can find a problem on a site, basically every site that they go to. But an important thing I try and keep in mind is that not everything is worth sounding the alarm for. You know, like if you have some damaged silt fence in an area of your site, it should be fixed, but you know, that doesn't justify writing up a non-compliance letter to Illinois EPA. I would say though that the little things that don't merit, you know, non-compliance letters, if you repeatedly don't fix them when you're asked, then that can turn into a bigger problem that deserves being reported up the chain.
And we do perform a lot of inspections for the IEPA, so it's and Army Corps, it's both up to them to determine if the person is still in compliance with their permit. We don't make that judgment call, but there's a lot of data that we collect while we're out during that site inspection that would indicate that this site is not in compliance with all the terms of like the ILR 10 permit, for example, just a lack of maintenance or inspection records, or the SWIP is not being accurately. So you can nitpick a lot of things, but on our reports, we have that bottom line, yes or no, is sediment being contained on the site. That's how we kind of like to take a binary approach towards it. And if it's saying no 2 times in a row, then we have a problem.
And I think a lot of the time, when we do come across some of those issues, it may just be even someone who just doesn't necessarily know or isn't quite aware, so we can use it as a learning experience, especially on the first time. And that's where that communication and creating those relationships too is figuring out, well, what is actually wrong? How can we fix it? How can this be addressed? So the next time that we come out, it's being addressed. And once you start seeing the repeat non-compliance is, like we've said before, is when we have those issues, and then you start sending out those reports to the regulatory authorities.
Moving on to the next question here. How often does a county or municipal ordinance play a role in the SESC inspection or review process?
In Lake County, yeah, I'd say for most of the clientele here today, it's almost every project you guys are encountering. So, you know, our limits are 5,000 square feet of disturbance, or if you're impacting an IW isolated wetland or water of Lake County, or if we have a core bump up that directs us to oversee that. But yeah, ours is pretty clear cut. When you're required to get a WDP or isolated wetland approval from us.
So I think kind of within Kane DuPage for the SWCD, we work pretty heavily with the 2 different counties. Stormwater ordinance, it might not necessarily come up in every single inspection that we do, but since we have those relationships with the municipalities where we're doing soil erosion sediment control inspections on part of the projects, knowing the ordinances for the different counties and how it may differ in different cities is extremely important into what we're inspecting and how we're going about our relationships on those inspections.
Okay. Moving on. So for this one, how do you go about inspecting for final stabilization? And this can be for in-stream portions of work and or for the overall project area as a whole.
I go onto a site, I put a hula hoop around my waist, I swing it around a couple times, I let it drop down, and we see if it's 70% of that has vegetative coverage in the hula hoop.
I didn't know where that was going. For in-stream stuff, yeah, you got to make sure that your banks are stabilized. At least the banks are stabilized before you reintroduce flow to your work area. For when we have Army Corps permitted projects that I'm doing soil erosion sediment control inspections for and in-stream inspections for, Army Corps has mentioned that when I'm doing the soil erosion sediment control, it's not just for the in-stream portion, it is for the whole site. So Army Corps has told me that the permit isn't closed until your site has reached permanent stabilization, but if you would like to reintroduce flow to your work area, you gotta at least have your banks permanently stabilized with that 70% ground cover of permanent vegetation.
Moving on here. Next question. If a project has applied for a notice of termination or NOT to close their NPDES permit but has not yet reached full stabilization, what would be your approach to that situation?
Point them to the permit, and that's what it says.
Well,
sorry.
If a site applies for a notice of termination but they haven't reached permanent stabilization yet, like if they notified me and asked me to come out to do a termination inspection, I would say this isn't terminated yet, but you can redo, if everything else about your site is done and you're just waiting on permanent vegetation to finish establishing, you can I tell them that they can cut back their weekly SWIP inspections to maybe once every 2 weeks, or if it's in really good shape, maybe once every 3 weeks. And then once they think it's reached permanent stabilization, give me another call and I'll come out and do a final inspection to make sure it's gotten to that 70% coverage.
Just to make sure that everybody knows that erosion control blanket is not permanent stabilization, just to make sure.
Okay. Question 8 is, how do local watershed plans play a role in your regular erosion and sediment control duties or programs?
I'm struggling to come up with an answer for this one. I don't typically reference watershed plans. Obviously, it's important to have a good perspective of what's going on elsewhere in the watershed, and maybe you could point or identify different areas that could be contributing to a large sedimentation making its way into a creek, for example. But I don't find myself referencing one of those 180-page watershed plans during my SESC review.
Yeah, during inspections, I know I don't particularly take into account local watersheds, but I know if you're in McHenry County, if you're getting a stormwater permit, I know McHenry County Planning and Development takes into consideration. Army Corps probably does as well. So it's probably done, considering local watersheds is probably done much more at the permitting level, not so much at the inspection level.
Okay. Next up, are there any projects or examples you may be able to discuss when the plans or implementation worked well or did not work well? And if applicable, what solutions or compromises were developed?
So Jeremy was on the panel earlier and he referenced a site in Antioch. I did some inspections for that site on behalf of Illinois EPA where they were having some sediment-laden stormwater get off-site, and it wasn't part of their plans to do this, but they created a stormwater basin. They lined it with erosion control mat to channel the water from the other areas of the site into this basin. They hired Flowcate to come out and do a whole filtration process as they pumped the water out of that sediment basin. And by the time they were done doing that, the water leaving the site and entering a lake nearby was in much better condition than the times I had been called out there for a public complaint. So none of that was in their original plans, but they adapted very well to add filtration and storage components to their plan.
Yeah, just a project in North Aurora that we lost a lot of sediment on. It's just, there was a big slope and we didn't, it just was lost on considering the upstream area that's contributing to the site, and we try to emphasize the priority, how necessary it is to establish those basins so that water can be stored on site immediately, but it just took so long. There's so much soil movement on the site. So a lot of that stuff can really be hashed out at this pre-construction meetings and with experience. So it's important that the SWCD staff have experience with projects like those. But eventually we were able to set up a series of measures to capture the water and basins throughout the site and just cut back on that total amount of water moving off of the site as possible. That included additional dewatering, like slip and slides and all this sort of stuff. Try to bypass as much of that water as possible so you don't have to treat it, and that's been referenced today.
Then last question here, what have you found to be the most effective strategy in reducing soil erosion and sedimentation on any project?
I'm a big proponent for stabilization. If you had to grade a large area and it's waiting for utilities to come in or for stormwater sewers to be installed, but that doesn't end up happening for a couple of months, or it's going to happen in stages throughout various areas of that big site, I would say that it should be temporary seeded, and there's a reason it's called temporary, because if you got to go in and disturb it to put in your storm sewer systems or your utilities in 3 weeks or in 4 weeks or in 6 weeks, then it's okay. At least you were protected from large precipitation events and offsite sedimentation with your temporary stabilization.
I'll defer to my colleague Maya. Communication, coupled with anticipation. Looking at the forecast, noting your on-site conditions currently, noting what might go wrong should it rain this weekend. We'll always get that 4-inch rain on Saturday afternoon, and we'll look at it on Monday. But if you're prepared and you can see it on the horizon, button things up, and just thinking 1 to 2 steps ahead of the game, so to speak.
Yeah, just piggybacking off of that, a lot of that can be done with the pre-construction meeting. Sometimes I find it effective to take an inspection report from another project, maybe a similar project. So say it's a farm field that's turning into a multifamily subdivision. Just take a previous inspection from another job and show them at the pre-construction meeting, this is what my report's gonna look like, this is what you can expect, this is what my expectations are, and to hash that all out. And it's really helpful if they have a weekly inspector that has a lot of soil erosion sediment control experience, so they could be helping them as much, because like what was mentioned in this slide, we shouldn't be telling them what to do. We just say how we see it, and I'm not always the best at that, but that has been an effective strategy, I think.
Yeah, and I think with anything, prevention is obviously going to be a lot easier than remediation. So looking at the causes of erosion that's going to happen during the planning phase and during the pre-construction, as opposed to trying to fix something where usually just throwing a silt fence at it is not going to be the option that's going to work best. So kind of just piggybacking off of all of those answers to the stabilization, especially during the winter, making sure that winter shutdowns and stabilizations are being communicated and talked about in late summer and early fall, when you're going to be able to actually seed and blanket adequately before potential any ground freezing, as well as just having that communication between the people that are on site and being able to actually implement those actions prior to it having to figure it out in the springtime when it thaws and get all those rains that are coming through.
Any other questions?
Yeah, we tend to be the ones out there. We're looking back on this county municipal ordinances. A lot of the times we're telling people in Kane County that there is, in the Kane County Stormwater Ordinance, there are terms related to winter stabilization. So we find ourselves referencing that quite frequently. And having that winter stabilization plan is really effective for those wet springs that are to come.
Right, if there's no other feedback regarding that, I'm not sure if we have any time for questions or not.
Sure.
Okay, we can take some questions for anyone who may have them.
Yeah, for each, if you're going to be applying for our involvement in our office, it's always going to likely come with a pre-construction meeting. I can't think of an instance where we wouldn't. Yeah, because that's the most important meeting, I feel like.
Yeah, at least a notification if it's something that we can't necessarily make in person. But even with that notification, it should require, it's like, hey, we're about to put these erosion controls in time. Would you like to come out and actually see them if we aren't able to attend the actual pre-construction meeting ahead of time?
Yeah, I'd say even in Lake County, when we're writing up permit conditions, we'll often, especially if there's a sensitive resource nearby, yeah, it's conditioned to have a pre-construction meeting or just an inspection, if minimally inspection, just one of us swing out there, make sure everything, all your BMPs are in place before you break ground.
Other questions?
Just while we're up here, I just want to reiterate that we are not a regulatory authority. We help the regulatory authorities with them. When you're applying to our office, you're not applying for a permit. You're applying for an application because it was a condition of another permit that you're getting, just so you know.
Okay. Well, if there aren't any other.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Since so many municipalities defer to the county stormwater ordinance, and we're in a time of a changing climate, do you think we should be adapting the county ordinance, or is there is there a way to encourage municipalities not to be doing just the minimum?
So it's a little bit of a common misconception. We aren't actually county government. We're part of state government. So when you're referring to a county's ordinance, like I'm in McHenry and Lake County Soil and Water Conservation District, I don't write the McHenry County Stormwater Ordinance. There are meetings where the public can sit in on. You can apply to go to their monthly meetings as well, where you can recommend changes or suggest changes. But as far as the municipalities have to be at least as strict as the county ordinance.
My question
Yeah.
was, as professionals in the field, do you think we should be changing the county ordinances?
They are going under change, at least in McHenry County. They are changing it right now. For various climate change could be part of it, but I know there's also a new MS4 requirements coming out from Illinois EPA, and so we are working on discussing changes and what should be done and how we're going to achieve it. So it is happening already.
In Cook County, the watershed management ordinance refers to the Illinois Urban Manual, so we're kind of covered with that.
Well, there certainly could be something to be said about those significant rain events that happen in a short period of time, and those are starting to happen more frequently, it seems like, over the years. So if that could be incorporated somehow in some type of backup plan, or prioritizing some type of backup plan for those events that we can now maybe expect once or twice a year, that would be useful.
Anything else? Yes.
Right.
Talk about an instance where you issued large fines for that.
We don't issue fines. We put together reports about what we saw on the site, and then we send that report to the permitting body, Army Corps, the county, or Illinois EPA, and then it's up to one of those three to decide if fines ought to be issued or not.
Yeah, the largest extent that I got just from contractor just being negligent, they got a cease and desist from the Army Corps of Engineers for their project, and we were able to resolve that within a week. So that's kind of the extent of that experience.
Yeah, for Lake County, some of our projects will hold, we hold an inspection deposit, and it's typically nominal, like $500. That's refundable at the end of it if everything's gone well. Bad cases, we could send up to the state's attorney. I've only been there 9 months, so I haven't had any issues yet. May no other have a little better history at that. But yeah, we are a regulatory body, so we do have that capacity. But Haven't had anything egregious. Frequently, instances where violations come in that clearly could qualify as significant fines, we generally try to work with them, because oftentimes it's a unincorporated private homeowner, et cetera. We don't want to burden them with that, so we try to work with them to, like, all right, let's fix this. Yep, we made a mistake. You made a mistake. Let's work with you to fix this up so we can, and as long as they're compliant and, willing to work with us, we don't really bring a hammer too much.
I can answer your question. So we have inspection deposits, and we used to have like a $5,000 inspection deposit. Depending on the severity of the violation, we either take 20% or 40%. And when you run out of money, we ask for more money to put in your inspection deposit. And if everything goes well, you get some of it at the end. But it would have to be a blatant negligence, where I come out, I tell you what's going on. My expectation is that by the time I come back, it'll be taken care of. But if it's continually disregarded, then we'll just take the money, and then you still have to do what you're supposed to do. I think that works also, a stop work order. I've had to do that on one of my projects because trying to work with a contractor, the SESC issues weren't being resolved. And I said, you cannot do any more work until you resolve your SESC issues. And that got their attention too, and then things got smoother from that point.
Yeah, scary.
So I'm interested in educating and empowering the public to protect our resources. And I don't mean to imply that you're not excellent at what you do, but as Patrick said, Kane County is a big county. You have a lot to cover. So I'm wondering what level you welcome citizen involvement. We were involved with the local Sierra Club chapter many years ago about educating people about construction site erosion control, and this is what you should be seeing there.
The runoff rangers?
Yeah, and and when I happen to call about a silt fence that maybe needs maintenance, I'm wondering the direction I could get from you about educating the public. Like, I don't want to be when my phone number comes up, like, oh God.
Well, you already are, but just kidding.
How can I help citizens help you in your?
I've incorporated citizen photos on my reports before. Someone has taken photos of sediment coming off from the middle of the Fox River on their canoe. I've incorporated it in my reports and just keep it. Don't say who it was coming from, but just say concerned citizen included this in the report. And then obviously they could reference the Illinois Urban Manual or some of our recordings from previous soil erosion sediment control workshops to get some type of technical experience when it comes to that. But they're always welcome to come into our field office, at least ours, and probably your guys too. So if they have questions or they have concerns, call into us. The best way to reach us is to call into the main number, and then we have a general inquiry email too, so that's always effective, so that we could be as collaborative as possible. We're always open to hear you're here. The citizens are why we're here. We're here to serve you guys, so we're always open to that. That's my perspective.
Like Patrick said, we'll take any complaint that comes in from the public, but in construction, a lot of times there's a lot of complaints that come in just because they don't like the construction. So to help the people you talk to submit, maybe it's a harsh word, but valid complaints, if it's clear and obvious that sediment is escaping the site from a specific location somewhere, then I would say then okay, maybe you can make a call. But we take everything welcome from the public, but if they can clearly identify that sediment is getting off their site, then that's a valid complaint.
I encourage photos. So.
Yeah, oh yeah, photos, absolutely, yes.
I think that if something happens on the Chicago River, the Army Corps gets a call, right?
Yes. And we'll investigate complaints too. I mean, if it's something that's not within our jurisdiction, we have a harder time investigating it. But yeah, I mean, we get reports all the time in that regulatory requests site that I mentioned in my presentation. There's also a spot there to submit concerns of enforcement actions or non-compliance. So we'll investigate those to our ability as well.
And I personally appreciate the call in and the concern, because we do have agreements within our two counties, and we have agreements with the Illinois EPA. So any site that has an active construction, we can look into and see if they have a permit. If they have that permit, we're able to go out there and do soil erosion sediment control inspections for their NPDES permit. So we can go check to see if it is valid or not, and then it allows us to kind of know what's going on in our neck of the woods as well. But I know I've talked with you about specific projects where you've seen issues, and yeah, I think being able to have a public that's educated on that and knowing the difference between what's a basic maintenance issue and what is a severe problem that needs to be fixed is extremely important. I think it starts with education as well too. So yeah, that and communication. So our office is always open. Our phone line is always open as well.
Anything else? Okay, our panelists will continue to be available after the seminar ends, so feel free to ask them any questions that may come up after that
And
point.
then Maya's got one quick announcement for an event that's coming up. But then, yeah. Get that one before? When I get ready.
Okay, so continuing in the spirit of education, I wanted to just, guys, let you know about a few events that Lake County Stormwater Management Commission is hosting. So our annual designated erosion control inspection workshop is going to be February 11th, and that's free and virtual, so you can watch it from wherever you are. And we offer 4.5 PDHs for that. Also, for those of you who are new to the erosion and sediment control measure world, we have a BMP field day. So we saw quite a few measures today, like silt fence and ditch checks and construction entrances and all that. So SMC has partnered with the Great Lakes chapter of the International Erosion Control Association to have a BMP field day so we can see these measures installed properly. And talk about them. So that event will be April 23rd at the Lake County Fairgrounds. And I think you will receive PDHs for that as well. But if you're new, it's a great opportunity to come and talk to experts and ask questions and actually see these measures installed. And we also, for those of you who are interested in soils, we are hosting a hydric soils class on June 5th and 6th at Lake County SMC. So it'll be partly in the office with instructors, and then we'll go out in the field and look at hydric soils. So the DECI virtual workshop is free, but the other two events cost money. If you want to find out more about it, just Google SMC DECI, and like the first entry that comes up, you can click on that. And I usually, not everything is posted right now, but I will post it when I get back to the office. But if you're interested, there's more opportunities for you to get educated and have more fun out there. So thank you.
All right, thank you for that, Maya. As we wrap up our seminar today, we brought up the Slido URL on the screen again, which will take you to our feedback page. We would appreciate any feedback you may have, either positive or negative, about your experience or anything you would like to see at future seminars, or any additional suggestions for speakers or presentations that we discussed in one of the previous questions. So I will bring it back over to Tommy to wrap it up here.
All right, so as you're filling out the end of seminar survey, we'll send out some emails afterwards, after the fact, for any PDHs or CEUs that you may be looking for. And if if you're curious, here's all of our contact information. Eventually, we'll be able to put up the video and have the slides for up on YouTube on our YouTube page, and should be able to go back to this in the next couple weeks whenever it gets edited and put together for that. But I'd like to thank all of you for coming out. Feel free to stick around and chat with people if you feel so inclined. Thank you to our panelists. Thank you to our presenters. And yeah, appreciate everybody coming out today.